What's up, everyone? We are diving back into the multiverse today for another epic. What if Hokage Naruto got Harem with Tsunade and Temari Part 4? If you enjoy this story, make sure to hit that like button and subscribe to the channel for more fanfics like this. Now, let's dive right into the fanfic. It was past midnight but Kankuro was still in the Hokage's office. In fact, he was trapped behind his brother's desk surrounded by over half a dozen people who were all talking at once, and despite his best efforts it had been so for over an hour. Now the puppet master actually had a lot more patience than either of his siblings, but he was fast reaching his limit. Slowly he got to his feet, menace seeping into his every motion. Silence. His voice was even and deadly, much like the tone his younger brother used when he was displeased. Much to his satisfaction, it had the desired effect as all present closed their mouths and some even took a couple steps back. Let me see if I have this right. His deep voice purred. Every one of you are telling me that without my sister here to hold your hands, your departments can't do anything. He heard several audible gulps as he stared at each on them in turn. Kankuro-sama, an older man, finally spoke out. Temari-sama is in charge of each of our departments, everything from scheduling to supplies. She made sure everything was in motion while she was away, but now that her absence has extended, we have reached the limit of our resources. The painted Junin couldn't believe he was hearing this. Were these people completely helpless? Or just incompetent? And does her assistant not know how everything is done? He received strange looks from all present. Then a female medic stepped forward, clearing her throat gently. Temari-sama doesn't have an assistant, she does everything herself. Kankuro was floored. He had often wondered why his sister always seemed to be doing paperwork and directing. Well, just about everything. But he had always assumed she was just a workaholic and had never questioned how she chose to spend her time. Look people, I'm tired, so I'm sugar-coating this for you people who haven't figured it out yet. He growled. Temari is missing, and until Gaara calms down enough to let this bloody sandstorm drop, we can't continue our search for her. And there is always the possibility that she is dead. There were several gasps from the puppet master's audience. So just to clarify, you people had better get used to doing things for yourselves. Because I can't guarantee how long it will take to either find her or replace her. With that said, he pointed to the door. Now get out, I want to get some sleep before I have to come check up on your asses. With much grumbling and glares thrown his way, the office slowly emptied. Once the door closed, he sat down and slowly massaged his temples. Shit, Temari. How could I not know how much you do around this hole? From the sounds of it, his Onezen was responsible for supplying half of Suna with provisions, as well as half a dozen other things he had never even thought of. So now I have to wonder if you chose to do it all yourself or if the decision was made for you. Green Eyes moved to the dark window. It wasn't visible from his vantage point at night, but he could still hear the sand wall that swirled around the village. Gaara, how much longer are you going to keep this up? On the far northern border of sand, a bewildered Konoha messenger decided to camp for the night, having traveled along the sand wall for yet another day, trying to find an end to what he had at first thought to be merely a sandstorm. But the entire border seemed to be blocked off. The Chunin had a feeling that it wasn't natural, but he had no way of confirming that suspicion. And there was also nothing he could do about it, so he decided to wait out the night and then head back to the main road, and hopefully by then whatever it was would let him pass. What makes you think I'm good enough to help raise your child? I wasn't good enough to raise my own. Temari could only stare at the blonde man standing in front of her. She was stunned, speechless. Her slightly sleep-logged mind was now wide awake. Naruto has a kid, seemed to be the only thought that she was able to focus on. His question to her was, for the moment, completely forgotten. Then, because he looked like he was about to turn and leave, she walked back to him. In the dim light, her silver eyes caught and held his, but the normal brilliant blue had turned dull. The sparkle was gone, replaced with pain. Still unsure of what else to say but desperate to keep him from leaving, she asked the one question that she had. You have a child? If possible, the fox vessel's eyes dimmed even more. No, I did, came his strangled reply. He didn't want to talk about it. Temari could clearly see that. Having been in the same position only that morning, she recognized the signs. And yet Hinata had been proven right, it did help to talk about it. And aside from the more negative emotion that had suddenly sprung to life within her that hinted towards jealousy, the kunoichi wanted to know what Naruto was talking about. She had never heard anything about him ever having a serious relationship, let alone being a father, but then she had not been to Konoha for years and her brothers had never shared any stories to that effect. What do you mean by, did? She asked, her voice soft. He couldn't believe that he had opened his mouth about that particular topic at all. It was stupid, he had never told another living soul about that time in his life, and he wasn't about to start. Naruto, please. He flinched when her hand gently cupped his face so that he would look at her again. She was standing so close that they nearly touched. What happened? Her eyes held sympathy and an openness to understand, not the disgust he had always expected to come with that question. And before he could think better of it, he started talking. Flashback 6 years ago. 19-year-old Naruto scrubbed his hands through his hair as he headed home. He had just finished giving his report from his last mission. He had been on the road for 4 weeks and was looking forward to a hot shower and a soft bed. I wonder if Jewel is at home or on a mission. He mused. If she's home, will you, as you say, break up with her? Kyuubi asked, his voice hopeful. Naruto sighed. Will you get off this kick already, furball? I am not breaking up with her. She is not an appropriate mate, Kit. The demon growled. The young man snorted at that. Come off it, you're the one who pointed her out in the first place. Naruto wasn't sure how many times he was going to have to point that out to his tenant before the fox gave up his prodding to be rid of his girlfriend. I pointed her out as a fun playmate, nothing more. The Nine-Tails shot back. She is not mate material, she is unstable. Unstable, huh? That's a new one. The blonde chuckled. This is no laughing matter, Kit. I would not want to see her with Kits should she conceive. Please. Naruto rolled his eyes. Jewel likes kids. Besides, that's not going to happen despite what you think of human birth control. People around here have been using it for years and it has worked fine for the last 8 months as well, which I seem to have to remind you every time we have this stupid conversation, so get over it already. Kyuubi ignored the reference to the many times this conversation had been repeated over the last half year. Your luck cannot hold out forever, and she does not like offspring, she tolerates them. You are seeing what you wish to in her and not what is really there. The white-eyed female would have been a better choice than this one. Naruto sighed again as he pushed open his apartment door. Will you get off the comparisons already? Jewel doesn't have a blood limit, so get used to it. We happen to be in love and nothing you have to say is going to get in the way. After a few choice words, Kyuubi stopped talking and Naruto was glad. He had been having the same argument almost word for word with the fox for over 4 months and it was really starting to wear on the young man's nerves. Once or twice he had thought of talking to Jewel about what Kyuubi had said, but his navy-haired girlfriend didn't really like talking about Kyuubi's opinions. About the fox's abilities and powers, sure, but not his opinions. But Naruto could understand that the demon could be very difficult to talk to and sometimes even he didn't like the demon's opinions. Shrugging off the whole conversation just as he had the last 100 times it had come up, the blonde shinobi headed for the bathroom to shower. It was still fairly early in the evening, so he figured if he hurried he'd have time to see if his girlfriend was in town and maybe take her out for dinner. Half an hour later he was leaving his bedroom, now dressed in clean clothes and feeling a lot more human, when his door opened to admit the very woman he had been about to go looking for. Jewel was a very striking young woman. She stood 5'10" on flat feet but still wore heels whenever she was off duty. Her navy blue hair was cut short, not quite touching her shoulders and parted so that her bangs hung over the right side of her face. Her cobalt eyes were lined heavily with black makeup while her lips only sported a light coating of gloss. The matching black halter top and knee-length leather skirt showed off her curves perfectly. Hey Jewel, I was just coming to look for you. Naruto exclaimed. He was more than thrilled to see her. He had missed her a lot and had almost slipped by using an endearment rather than her name in greeting, something that the beauty hated. Naruto was by her side in a second and wrapping his arms around her waist lifted her off the ground as he whirled her around the room. I really missed you. Put me down, was her only reply. Puzzled because she didn't hug him back, he did as he was told. That's when he realized she was holding herself stiffly in his arms. Is something wrong? He asked as his hands slid up to her shoulders. Jewel shrugged away from him. Don't touch me. He was about to protest, but the cold look she gave him stopped him in his tracks. He knew that look, she was upset with him for some reason. He quickly searched his memories for something he might have done before he left that she could still be angry about. Jewel did tend to never forget anything that upset her, but the blonde came up blank. As far as he knew, he hadn't said or done anything that was out of line. What's wrong? He asked again when she turned and walked further into the apartment. She didn't say a word as she bypassed the living room, and he followed her into the kitchen where she rummaged through the one cupboard until she found a bottle of sake and a cup. Naruto sighed silently. So much for a pleasant evening. When Jewel went for her alcohol stash before talking to him, it meant he was probably going to be dodging things before their talk was over. Several minuets ticked by while the stunning blue-haired woman slowly and deliberately poured herself a drink, then downed it in one gulp, then refilling the cup before finally turning to squarely face him. I hate you, she growled. It's going to be a very long night. Naruto inwardly cringed. Arguments that started with that phrase always took forever to clear up. Tell her you hate her too. Kyuubi hissed. The conniving bitch is. Shut up, furball. You're not helping. Naruto cut him off before returning his attention to his irritated girlfriend. So are you going to tell me why you hate me this time? He asked quietly, stuffing his hands into his pockets as he leaned back against the counter. He had discovered that the less he said or did, the sooner she came to the point. The second helping of sake was downed. While she glared at him with her dark eyes, the cup was refilled once again. I'm pregnant. She spat at him while drumming her painted nails on the countertop. Naruto blinked. It took him a second to understand what she had just said. Then with a joyful whoop he snatched her up and spun her around the apartment. That's so awesome, he exclaimed when he finally came to a stop. So when did you find out? How far along are you? Can they tell if it's a boy or a girl yet? His excited chatter was cut off when the kunoichi's fist connected with his gut. Taken by surprise, the blow doubled him over for a moment. I knew it. You did this on purpose. Jewel accused as she pulled away from him and headed back towards the kitchen. You bastard, she hissed before reaching for her sake. The cup never reached her lips. Naruto snatched it out of her hands before she could drink it. I'm not sure what you're mad at, but you should know that you can't drink alcohol in your condition. It's not good for you or the baby. The blonde admonished as gently as he could while he dumped the sake down the sink. He never touched the stuff himself. You're not only stupid, but insane if you think I'm having this kid. Jewel shouted as she reached for the sake bottle. Again she was intercepted as Naruto snatched it up and hid it behind his back. What are you talking about, Jewel? He asked as calmly as he could. He was hoping that he had misunderstood her last statement. What the fuck do you think I mean? I've never wanted a kid, and I sure as hell don't want yours. She shrieked as she took another swing at him. Naruto's heart twisted painfully in his chest as he dodged her fist. He couldn't believe what he was hearing. How could he have been so wrong? This also meant that Kyuubi had been right all along. Stop thinking about that kid. The demon snapped from inside his head. It doesn't matter right now. You have to calm the female down. Regardless of her inadequacies, she is carrying our offspring and we can't jeopardize that. Naruto agreed with his tenant and got rid of the bottle in his hands just as his irate girlfriend started pounding his chest with her fists. Her blows didn't hurt him in the slightest, but he captured her wrists to stop the movement. Jewel, honey, you have to calm down, he told her as he tried to stop her struggles without bruising her skin. Don't call me honey, you asshole, she shouted, but her voice sounded wobbly to Naruto, and on closer inspection he found her eyes to be bright with unshed tears. He could understand if this whole tirade of hers had been brought on by uncertainty. Hell, if she gave him a moment to breath, he would be freaking out a bit himself, and there was nothing he wanted more than a family of his own, not even being Hokage. Releasing her hands, he wrapped his arms around her instead, pulling her close to his chest, trapping her arms in between their bodies. Just calm down so we can talk about this, okay? He spoke into her hair as she struggled against his hold. Please, Jewel, you caught me by surprise. Getting upset won't help anything. Finally, the woman in his arms stopped fighting his embrace and actually leaned into him a bit. This was not supposed to happen. She quietly mumbled into his chest. His heart took another blow at her words, even if he admitted that having a baby right then had defiantly not been in the plan. Jewel was a year his junior, and he had often had to remind himself that not all girls were like Sasuke's wife Yuta and ready to start a family at 17. But he was pretty sure that once he got her calmed down, the two of them could talk everything out. She didn't put up a fuss when he guided her back to the living room, where he sat down on the couch and pulled her onto his lap, glad for once she wasn't objecting to him cuddling with her. Naruto took a few moments to just hold her close while he tried to figure out where to start. Luckily Kyuubi helped him out. I don't recall detecting a change in her scent. Ask her when she discovered she was breeding. The demon directed. Naruto agreed that it was a good place to start. The fox had detected both Yuta's pregnancies only days after conception. When did you find out? He finally broke the silence by asking. Jewel sniffed. Yesterday. I wasn't feeling good the last couple of days, so I took a home test. Naruto was torn between being glad she hadn't been going through this alone for very long and feeling guilty that he hadn't been there for her when she did find out. I'm sorry I wasn't here. He quietly apologized. She must have conceived that last day before we left then. Kyuubi commented. That would make her 4 weeks along then. Naruto replied. The two males would have discussed what to do next, but Jewel interrupted by sliding off Naruto's lap and onto the couch. It doesn't matter. I'm not keeping it. She stated, her voice quiet. Even as her words pierced his already aching heart, Naruto wanted to grab her and pull her close again, but knowing that she wouldn't allow that, he reached for her hand instead. Jewel, don't touch me, she snapped, interrupting him while moving down to the end of the couch. You've done quite enough already. She was glaring at him once again. Now I have to try to get some time off so I can get this taken care of, and the Junin promotions are coming up in a month. Forgetting what he had been about to say a moment before, Naruto tried to decipher what she was talking about and what it had to do with the promotions. Why are you worried about time off now? You should be able to put in some more training and light missions for a while yet. He reasoned aloud. The navy-haired woman shook her head. You really are thick, aren't you? I'm not going to have an abortion here. People would find out about it, and I sure as hell don't want anyone to know about this. She snapped. If I didn't have guard duty the next 2 days, I would have left already. Naruto nearly choked as she slashed through his last hopes that she wasn't serious. Why? You wouldn't have. He protested, badly shaken. Oh yes I would. Then I could have kissed yours goodbye and never would have had to tell you a thing. The Kitsune vessel was sure he had never felt so much pain in his life, not even when Sasuke had put his hand through his chest all those years ago. Steady, Kit. The Kyuubi muttered, although the demon was seething inside. Stay focused. You can't afford to dwell on your feelings right now. We have to make the female see reason. With a deep breath and a nod of agreement, Naruto shoved his emotions away as he moved to kneel in front of Jewel and captured her hands in his. This time he didn't release her when she tried to pull away. Keeping his grip firm but gentle, he brought their hands down to rest on her lap. Jewel, please listen to me. He pleaded. Midnight eyes meet his briefly before dropping to focus on her lap as well. Look, I know you're a little freaked out right now. We didn't plan this at all, so I know how you feel. But we need to think calmly about all this before we make any decisions. Naruto was a little surprised to hear himself sound so calm. His insides were in knots. What do you mean we? My decision to terminate the pregnancy or not has nothing to do with you. She snorted. The sound turned to a gasp as the girl felt the grip on her hands tighten. Nothing to do with me. His eyes narrowed. That is my child's life you're talking about throwing away. The blonde shinobi growled. It has everything to do with me. Unused to the cold authority in his voice, Jewel shrank back into the sofa in an effort to put some distance between them, despite the fact that he still had her hands imprisoned. The movement was not lost on the young man, so he took a few deep breaths and loosened his grip slightly. Look, all I'm saying is that both of us need some time to wrap our heads around all of this and come up with a plan. Silence fell for a few minutes as he waited for her reply. Finally she nodded slightly. I guess, I just don't want a kid, never have. Naruto might not share her feelings, but he knew many ninja who did. At least she sounded a little more reasonable now. I can understand that, but will you at least consider a few other options before you make a final decision? What other options? She asked sullenly. Inwardly Naruto signed in relief. Maybe this could be worked out after all. He hoped so anyway. If you really don't want it, I can raise the baby on my own. She gave him a horrified look, but he lifted a hand to keep her from speaking. Listen, I know it would mean taking some time off, but if you really don't want anyone to know about it, then we can always arrange to go somewhere until it's born. He gently rubbed his thumbs over the back of her hands while she stared at him in shock. What I would really prefer to do would be for us to be a family and raise him or her together. If you don't want to be married, that would be okay, I guess. Stunned silence ensued as Naruto waited for Jewel's response to his somewhat unorthodox proposal. Her mouth moved several times before she finally found her voice. You have got to be kidding me. Why the hell would you want to do that? She finally asked, her voice shaky. Do you have any idea what you're even talking about? There is no way you can have a career and a family, it's impossible. She stated more firmly. Naruto's heart by this time was starting to go numb from all the jabs she was sending his way. He was also starting to realize that Kyuubi might have been right about her, in some ways at least. But as the demon had already pointed out, none of that mattered. Right now he had to fight for what he wanted. A career isn't everything, Jewel, and quitting the Anbu would be easy, that way I could stay closer to home. Jewel looked horrified. You would quit the Anbu? Why? Naruto sighed. They had never talked about this kind of stuff before, he rationalized, and that's why she was so surprised. Look, my family would come before everything else in my life. His hands once again tightened on hers, willing her to understand. If I had to, I would quit being a shinobi altogether. The words were out of his mouth before he realized what he had said, but when he did, it also became clear to him that they were true. He wouldn't take them back. Dreams changed, and at that moment having his own family far outweighed his desire to be Hokage one day. The woman before him sat wide-eyed, barely blinking as she stared at him as if she had never seen him before. The blonde wasn't able to read her reaction to his speech. He had never seen his girlfriend at a loss for words before, and it was scaring him a little bit. Finally her mouth opened. It once again took a couple tries before any words came out. You're serious, aren't you? She whispered. You really want this kid? Naruto nodded, his eyes shining with sincerity and hope. I do, and I want you too if you'll have me. I love you, Jewel. Kyuubi's exasperated sigh was ignored as Jewel once again broke eye contact and looked away. Maybe you're right, Naruto. We should probably think about this for a while before we decide anything. She finally admitted softly. Naruto inwardly sighed with relief. It wasn't much, but since Jewel seldom relented on anything, it was a start. I should head home, she announced, suddenly getting to her feet, forcing Naruto to stand as well to get out of her way. He was disappointed that she didn't want to stay with him for the night. But he also admitted that some space would probably be a good thing at the moment. I'll walk you home, he offered, guiding her towards the door with a hand on the small of her back. Promise me that you won't tell anyone about this, she demanded before he could open the door. Naruto wasn't very happy with the request. He really could use a good talk with Iruka or even Sasuke about everything, but in this instance he was willing to do anything to keep the woman next to him happy. So he nodded. I promise, not a word. That seemed to satisfy her because she allowed him to escort her out the door. The walk across town to the house Jewel shared with 3 other women was silent, with each of them lost in their own thoughts. The kunoichi said goodnight at the door and she was through it before Naruto could kiss her goodbye. With a single hand sign, Naruto teleported back to his flat. As soon as he was certain that he was alone, he collapsed into the nearest chair. Kyuubi. His voice wobbled. He was completely at a loss as to what to do. Just breathe, Kit. The demon advised first before saying anything else. Naruto hadn't even realized that he had been practically holding his breath for the last little while. Closing his eyes, he slumped down in his seat and tried to focus on drawing air in and out of his lungs. Much better. Kyuubi approved a few minuets later. You tried to tell me earlier, didn't you? Naruto asked. His voice teared. That she was breeding. Yes, but that does not matter now. The demon replied. What do I do, Kyuubi? Fear was starting to seep into the young man's being as the enormity of the situation finally started to sink in. He really wished that he could go pound on Iruka's door and spill everything and get the older man's advice. But as much as he wanted his adopted father's help, he had promised not to tell anyone about it. Kyuubi of course didn't count because he was already part of Naruto and knew everything anyway. When the kitsune didn't answer for a time, the blonde got worried. "You're mad that I didn't listen to you, aren't you?" he asked quietly. The demon snorted. "That is now a moot point, Kit. Saying, 'I told you so,' will not help this situation. I was in fact trying to think of a way to keep that female grounded enough to get her and the kid through this breeding in one piece." Naruto frowned. "What do you mean by that?" "As I suspected, she is not taking well to the prospect of having a kid. Luckily this wasn't planned or she would have more than one in her belly. But that is beside the point. She is flighty like a bird, she can never stay in one place. Her temperament is also very high-strung. She will require careful handling." Naruto shrugged. "She always has needed special attention, that's nothing new." Kyuubi sighed and in his mind's eye he could see the creature shake his head. "Perhaps you were not listening to her earlier. She has no wish to carry our offspring to birthing, so it will take a great deal of work to convince her otherwise and then look after her health. Unwilling birthing females tend to get ill easily." The young shinobi shuddered as his tenant's words finally hit home. Kyuubi was right about Jewel being high maintenance as it was. The thought of trying to keep her in a relatively good mood for 9 months was very daunting. "So back to my original question, what do I do?" The Kyuubi's reply was immediate and firm. "Anything. Anything to keep her happy until the kid is birthed. Offspring are precious and even if it will gain no useful skills from its dam it will still be very powerful." Naruto nodded even though he only agreed with the first part of what the demon had said. The two of them had spoken from time to time about the potential abilities Naruto's children would have thanks to the fox's influence since the two of them had chosen to merge. But Naruto had never really cared what the kitsune had to say about finding an appropriate female. As far as the blonde was concerned, he just wanted to find someone to love that would love him in return. He had been sure that Jewel would be the one, but now for the first time he was beginning to have his doubts. "You should get some sleep, Naruto. You will need to be rested to deal with everything tomorrow." Kyuubi interrupted his thoughts but suggesting. The shinobi blinked in surprise. "Did you just call me by my name, Furball?" For as long as the two had talked, the young man was sure that the demon had never called him by name. It was always Kit, young one or human. It doesn't seem appropriate to call you Kid when you're expecting young of your own." The fox grumbled defensively. For the first time that evening Naruto relaxed and even chuckled slightly. Maybe everything would turn out all right after all, he thought as he got to his feet and headed for his bedroom to get ready for bed. After all, he had Kyuubi to help him out. The next 2 days did not go very well. Jewel was back to being angry at Naruto and nothing he said or did seemed to make any difference. On the afternoon of the third day the two had an all-out yelling match. It was the first time the young man had stood up to his girlfriend and insisted that she change her mind. Jewel meanwhile accused him yet again of getting her pregnant on purpose. When he suggested that they talk to someone about it, either a medic or the Hokage, the young woman completely lost it and threatened to kill herself if he so much as breathed a word to anyone. Just the thought of her committing suicide because of him terrified Naruto, and he tried his best to make up with her by promising to remain silent, and also to stop pushing her to keep the baby. He didn't like it. Both males wanted to grab her and lock her away until the child was born, but that was not an option. He did his best, but they parted on barely civilized terms, and Kyuubi had his paws full trying to keep Naruto calm and rational through the rest of the day. But the time the young Junin got off duty late that night, the fox was considering suggesting that Naruto break his promise and go to the Hokage for help. After all, females understood other females better than a male ever could. But after the two of them discussed that option, they both agreed that it was too risky, at least at that point. And because of the argument earlier in the day, they decided that it would also be wise to wait until morning before trying to speak to her again. "I don't know if I've ever felt this exhausted," Naruto mumbled as he unlocked his apartment. He didn't bother turning on the lights. He had excellent night vision thanks to Kyuubi, and he was headed straight to bed anyways. "Why is the light on in the bathing room?" Kyuubi asked. "Oh, must have forgotten it this morning," the blonde muttered. But as he reached for the knob, a sickeningly sweet smell assaulted his nose. "What the?" Panic set in as soon as he recognized the smell. With a bang he pounded through the door. The bright lights momentarily blinded his eyes, but his nose wasn't so lucky and it was assaulted by a wall of scent. Blood. Fresh blood that was all too familiar. Jewel. His vision cleared and all he could see was red. In his panicked state of mind it seemed to be everywhere, and lying on the floor in the middle of it all was the body of the girl he loved. He was on his knees beside her in less than a second, gathering her limp body into his arms. God. Jewel. Kit. Her heart is still beating. Kyubi exclaimed, he being slightly less affected by the situation than his host. A quick feel of the pulse at her throat confirmed a very weak beat. Thanks to years of training, Naruto's cooler mindset took over. A quick scan found a gash in her left wrist. Seal the wound. Kyubi ordered, even though it was now barely leaking blood. By focusing some of the fox's burning red chakra into the pad of his thumb and running it gently over the cut, he was able to cauterize it and stop the remaining seepage. We have to get her to the hospital. Naruto muttered as he gathered her closer. There is no time for that, Kit. Kyubi growled, before asking. Do you trust me? Of course. Came the immediate reply. Good. Slit your wrist. What? Your blood has healing properties if combined properly with my chakra. The Kyubi explained. Make her ingest it, I'll do the rest. It Naruto a second to decide what to do, but the last couple of years of being merged with the demon inside of him as well as the battles they had faced together had established a trust that overrode any misgivings. A moment was all it took for his to completely release the power inside his body. Red chakra swirled around the small area as Naruto's physical features changed. As soon as his teeth had morphed into jagged fangs, he sliced through his right wrist and used a ring of chakra to keep the cut sealed until he had it close to Jewel's lips. Don't hesitate. Kyubi warned before Naruto had a chance to. The shinobi nodded and shifted the woman in his arms so that she was in a better position, then released the ring so that his blood drizzled into her mouth. This is way too vampirish. He mumbled, but the demon ignored his words. Time was measured by the amount of times the kitsune 2 minutes his host to pause in his feeding of blood while the fox used his power to infuse every cell of the female's body to the point where he could manipulate her system into accepting the foreign blood as her own. When the demon was satisfied that she was stable, he told Naruto he could stop feeding her. The cut on the blonde's arm was healed almost instantly. What now? He asked as he sat cross-legged with the pale body of his girlfriend in his arms. You may take her to your medics if you wish, but there is really no need. She will survive with rest. Naruto nodded silently, his sorrow-filled eyes fixed on Jewel's face. He couldn't finish the sentence before his throat closed up. The offspring is strong, he will survive. Kyubi assured him. Naruto let out a ragged breath. You're sure? Of course, he is already his father's get. I would say that it is only because the female carried him that she is still alive. Naruto's frown deepened. What do you mean by that? Although it has barely started to develop, the kid already had tremendous power, not unlike a demon child. I believe that when the female lost consciousness, it was strong enough to slow the blood flowing out of her body. That's impossible. Naruto stuttered, too shocked to say anything else. The fox snorted. You forget, he also carries some of my traits, it is more than possible. He assured his host. Naruto was still too upset to argue, so he just accepted Kyubi's word and decided to ask a different question in an effort to distract himself. You said he, is it really a boy or are you just referring to it that way? Kyubi's voice softened to a more soothing tone. It is indeed a male, his heart already beats strongly. That confused the blonde slightly. Isn't it a little early for there to be a heartbeat? For a human, but not for a fox. Came the reply. Naruto made a strangled sound in his throat, but the kitsune interrupted him before he could say anything. Do not fear, the kid is fully human, it just appears that thanks to my influence he will develop more quickly, at least at this stage. Naruto wasn't really sure how reassuring that was, he was still a little bit too shell-shocked to absorb everything at once. If you would like to check its well-being for yourself, I could assist you. Kyubi offered when he realized that his host needed to be distracted from what had just happened. You can do that. Of course, unlike you, I do not need your medic's training to do so simple a task. Place your hand on her belly and close your eyes, I will do the rest. Naruto did as instructed. As soon as his lids closed, he felt Kyubi's power flare through him. A moment later he could feel the echoes of a tiny heartbeat reverberate against his palm. He knew that it had to be his imagination, but it also felt like something brushed lightly against his hand, a presence. He never noticed the first tears that fell from his closed eyes. His son was alive. He felt his heart swell in both relief and joy. Beautiful, he whispered before he slowly opened his eyes and looked down at the woman in his arms. A small amount of color was starting to return to her features. I can't lose him, not after all this. He silently vowed. He heard Kyubi give a rounding cheer, but that only reminded the young man of the trial he still had ahead of him when Jewel finally regained consciousness. More tears filled his eyes. Despite everything she had done, he loved them both and he didn't want to have to choose one over the other, but he knew it very well might come down to that, and the knowledge broke his heart, even if he already knew what his choice would be. He closed his eyes again as he gathered the mother of his child closer as the first sob racked his body. For him there really wasn't a choice, he would protect his child with his life if need be, even from his own mother. The Kyubi wisely pulled back, not saying a word as his host cried his heart out over the family he wanted but wasn't sure he would be allowed to have. When dawn finally lit the eastern sky, the first fingers of light slowly crept into Naruto's bedroom to illuminate the two forms laying in the oversized bed. When the young shinobi had finally pulled himself together in the wee hours of the morning, he had bathed the woman in his arms, working all dried blood from her hair and body. After drying her off, he wrapped her in an extra blanket before tucking her into bed. He had then gone to work cleaning his bathroom. It took him a while as blood seemed to cover almost every surface. Much to his relief, however, it soon became apparent that the red substance was in fact smeared, rather than sprayed, causing it to look like a lot more than there really was. Once he was satisfied that the room was as clean as possible, he showered himself before joining Jewel in bed. But he didn't allow his eyes to close even though he was physically and emotionally exhausted. Instead, he held her close and watched her sleep, afraid that if he slept she would be gone when he woke. Perhaps I should speak with her, Kyubi quietly suggested when it became apparent that Naruto had no intention of dozing off. And what would you say to her? Naruto silently asked. I don't want to scare her. Maybe she should be a little scared. That female has never had any respect for you. I know what you're thinking, Furball, and forget it. I am not going to threaten her. It would be the quickest and probably the most effective way to get what we want. The fox argued. Forget it. We're both adults and I'm sure we can come up with a solution that we can both agree on. Naruto knew he sounded a lot more confident than he really was, and judging from the disgusted snort from Kyubi, the fox knew it too. But the demon didn't say anything else. It was nearly 9 o'clock before Jewel showed any signs of life. Slowly her eyes fluttered open and she took in her surroundings. How do you feel? Naruto asked gently, even though he wanted to grab her and shake her until she told him why she had done something so stupid. Her dark eyes blinked several times as if trying to figure out what he had asked. Am I still alive? She finally asked, her voice slightly hoarse. Naruto nodded as he leaned over her slightly, watching her closely as he spoke again. Barely. If I had come home any later you might not be. Her navy lashed closed again and for a few minuets the two remained silent as they lay side by side. Finally Naruto couldn't stand it anymore. Why did you do it, Jewel? How could you try to take your life like that? Sapphire eyes flashed open and sparkled angrily despite her weak state. You told the Hokage and everyone what happened, she accused. Naruto was shocked at her words. What are you talking about? I haven't told a soul, I swear. She glared suspiciously up at him. Why should I believe you? She spat before she attempted to roll away from him. The blankets as well as her body's weakness from loss of blood slowed her down, so it was very easy for Naruto to pull her back into place. I have never lied to you, Jewel, I swear. I might have thought about going to talk to someone, to ask for advice, but I swear I didn't. He wondered what had suddenly changed over the last couple days so that she no longer trusted him. They lay staring at each other for a few moments before Jewel demanded that he get out of her way so that she could sit up. He complied but stayed close enough to help her as need be, knowing that she would probably still be very weak. But it turned out that she wasn't as hard-pressed to move as he had expected. Maybe I shouldn't have healed her that much, Kyubi remarked. Naruto didn't bother to reply as he was too focused on Jewel and trying to figure out a way to make her understand and believe him as she started to work her way towards the edge of the bed, holding the blanket she was wrapped in tightly to her body. Jewel, you have to believe me. He pleaded, not knowing what else to say. No, I don't. She shot back. Besides, it doesn't matter now. He grabbed her arm to keep her from getting off the bed. What's that supposed to mean? With a toss of her head, she turned to give him a smug look. If there's no problem, there's nothing for you to tell us there. It took him a moment to figure out what she meant, and when he did, he felt anger start to swell up inside of him. You slit your wrist because you thought that even if you lived, the baby wouldn't. The smirk she gave him was more than enough answer for him. His grip tightened and he pulled her back towards him. Well, I've got news for you, Jewel. He informed her, his voice uncharacteristically cold. My son isn't so easy to kill. In fact, he is alive and well, just like you. It was Jewel's turn to be puzzled, and when the meaning of his words registered, she went berserk, screaming and thrashing about as she tried to get away from the hold he had on her. Unable to still her movements, Naruto finally resorted to grabbing her arms and rolling so that he could pin her body down with his own until she stopped struggling. Which didn't take long. Naruto's size and weight were on his side and she wasn't completely at full strength. Get off me, she hissed once she discovered how futile her fight was. Not until you calm down enough to talk about this like a rational person. He stated firmly. He knew he wasn't hurting her because he actually had most of his weight on his elbows and was only caging her with his body. Calm. Rational. How could any sane and rational person be calm when they have a monster growing inside of them? She shrieked before trying to throw him off again. Naruto grabbed her flailing hands and pinned them above her head. What the hell are you talking about now? You're not making any sense, woman. He growled even as he wondered if she was going insane. Jewel stopped moving as quickly as she had started. Her eyes and voice turned as cold as ice. Come now, Naruto, quit being so naive. You have a demon inside of you, as everyone knows. You've merged with it. That makes you the monster the whole village always knew you were. Naruto pulled back as if he had been slapped, although none of her blows had ever hurt him as badly as her words just did. But Jewel wasn't done yet. You're a monster. And if any woman is ever stupid enough to give you a child, it will be the same thing. And I for one will never subject this village to having to deal with a second monster. Naruto couldn't fathom where that kind of logic could possibly be coming from. He was hurt by her words, but he could also feel himself start to get angry again. I can't believe that you actually believe what you're saying. He told the glaring woman. Yes, I'm a demon vessel, and yes, I do combine with the fox at times for more power when I need it. But that's me. It has nothing to do with my kids. They would be no different from anyone else. The last statement was greeted by a chuckle from Kyuubi. Nice cover up, Kit. The blonde didn't get the chance to answer. You really think I'm going to believe that? Jewel spat. It would be you all over again, and I refuse to have anything to do with a thing like that. With a mutinous set of her chin, Jewel laid back and glared at him. Naruto frowned as flashes of his childhood came to him, of how people treated him before he entered the academy, and many even after. The occasional beatings, curses and glares thrown at him wherever he went. Was he wrong to think that it would be different for his son? He gave his head a shake. Of course it would. He had grown up alone and without friends or family. Now it was different. He was a respected Anbu and he had people who didn't care that he had Kyuubi sealed inside of his body. Life for his child would be worlds away from what it had been for him. He said as much to Jewel, who only laughed mockingly. Well, you go ahead and believe that, but you can find another girl to test it with, because this girl is not going to allow a creature to grow inside of her. A low threatening growl sounded from Naruto's throat, causing the young woman to give him a weary look. Well, guess what, Jewel? I have news for you too. You might have gotten pregnant by accident, but there is no way in hell I'm going to let you throw my kid away like a piece of trash. Naruto was struggling to keep his voice as even and normal as possible. For the first time he was starting to realize just how shallow a person his girlfriend was, just like Kyuubi had said, and he wondered why she had gotten involved with him in the first place if she really thought he was a monster. But those were questions for another time. Now we can do this however you want. Whether it's move away for a while or stay in Konoha, but either way you're going to have this baby. After he's born you can go to hell if you want to, I really don't care anymore. I just want my son. Jewel gaped at him, too stunned by his demands to reply just then. The girl had never seen the more forceful side of Naruto and it sobered her immediately. But Jewel was nothing if not resourceful, and she had the advantage of knowing every button to push when it came to her lover. She had made it a point to learn every one of his quirks and weaknesses. It only took her moments to come up with a new angle for her argument, since it was obvious that for once he was not going to bow to her demands. Her voice changed from angry to a whimpering tone while her whole demeanor turned to that of someone who had been severely wounded. I'm surprised at you, Naruto. I never realized how selfish you were. She stated quietly. Puzzled, Naruto pulled away from her. What are you talking about? He wasn't sure what had prompted the sudden change in her and he didn't know how to proceed. Jewel sighed heavily. I guess I have gone about this the wrong way. I just assumed you would see things my way. She blinked rapidly as tears formed in her eyes. I just never thought you could be so insensitive. Releasing his hold, he moved away from her completely and moved to sit cross-legged beside her instead. I don't think I'm being insensitive. He defended. I think it's the other way around. Jewel remained lying in the same position he had held her in, her hands resting by her head. The only movement from her was her now trembling lips and the tear that trailed down her cheek. Yes, you are. You're only thinking of yourself and what you want, you're not thinking of the little one at all. She accused. Her hand moved down to rest on her still flat stomach. What the hell are you talking about? Naruto shouted. Her actions both confused and angered him. I'm not the one who just tried to kill him. His whole body started shaking with rage, his fists clenched and unclenched as he fought to control himself so that he wouldn't do her bodily harm. More tears fell from her eyes. I did what I thought was best. I couldn't stand the thought of a child of mine growing up the same way you did. A sob shuddered through her body. I didn't think I could live with myself, so I was going to go too. Naruto's anger left him as quickly as it had come to be, once again replaced by confusion. But what about all that stuff you just said? He asked. Jewel rolled onto her side and curled into a ball. I was angry. I didn't think about what I was saying, it just came out. After all the fear and pain I went through to try to make this right, I was angry that you made it all a moot point. Naruto was starting to get a headache from trying to compare her previous actions with what she was saying now and trying to figure out which one was the truth. None of it made any sense and he had 100 questions bouncing around his skull. Finally, he was able to voice one of them. How could you possibly think that either one of you dying would make anything right? A heavy sigh left her. Think about it, Naruto. No matter what you have done with your life, of how many friends you have now, there are still a lot of people who hate and fear you. You remember the stories you told me about when you were young? He nodded. Whether you believe it or not, the same thing will happen to any kid you ever have. She stated, her voice sad. No way. Naruto denied. It would be way different. I was alone, my kids wouldn't be. Jewel's eyes closed tiredly. It wouldn't matter. The same people are still around as when you were young. They would simply transfer their hate to an easier target and their kids would follow their example. It would never be safe here for your kids. Naruto felt a wave of dread wash over him at her words. He had never considered the possibility of his enemies switching their attention from him to his son. And he did have enemies, not counting the people of the village who still hated him. The Akatsuki were still after him to try and gain control of Kyuubi, while a number of sound ninja were still after him for killing Orochimaru, not that anyone from Leaf knew that he had killed the snake Sannin. He heard Kyuubi growl in his head and was able to pull himself together. Giving himself a shake, he reminded himself that other shinobi had about the same dangers facing them, like Sasuke, who had to watch out for his psycho brother every day, and yet he and others had managed to raise their children safely in Konoha. Things are different, no Jewel, you don't have to worry about anybody hurting either one of you. He assured her, even though he sounded more sure than he felt. Jewel shook her head sadly, her eyes downcast. You're wrong, no one would want another you around. That's just the way things are. Things can change, he stated firmly. And if they don't? She asked, a shiver running through her body. Naruto sighed and reached over to give her calf a reassuring squeeze. We can always move, I guess. You mean just give up on the shinobi way of life? Turn our backs on everything we've ever believed in? Jewel's voice had a slightly panicked quality to it. Naruto thought about it for a moment. Not necessarily. We could always get transferred to Suna or something like that. Jewel sighed heavily yet again. I wish I could be as optimistic as you are. I still think there will be people who would stop at nothing to prevent a thing like this from happening, who don't want a smaller version of you around. She whispered. You let me worry about that. Naruto told her. I'll take care of everything. I wish I could be as certain as you. Came her sad reply. Not being sure of what else he could say to assure her that everything would be fine, Naruto slid off the bed as he announced that he was going to go make something for breakfast. In truth, he needed a minute to himself. He was starting to see the truth in her words and it scared him. Suddenly he wasn't so sure that he could live up to his promise to keep anything bad from happening. After all, he hadn't been able to win the council over yet. They were still determined to stop him from becoming the Rokudime ever since he had defied orders to help Sasuke return to Sound to save his fiancée. They were still watching him very closely. Then there was Sasuke. He hadn't been able to stop his best friend and rival from leaving in the first place. The fact that he had eventually gotten him back wasn't the point. The simple truth was that as hard as Naruto tried, there were things he just couldn't change or prevent, as much as he wished it was otherwise. Despite what some people thought, he was only human. As he left the bedroom lost in thought, he didn't realize that his uncertainty was showing on his face, nor did he see the victorious smirk that spread across Jewel's face when she saw it. Once in the kitchen, he slumped against the counter, allowing himself to slowly slide down to the floor. As all of the what ifs and maybes crowded into his mind. Stop thinking like that, the Kyuubi ordered, interrupting the flow of negative thoughts. If you start thinking you will fail, you will. He stated firmly. Naruto pulled his knees up to his chest. But what if she's right? How can I knowingly subject my own flesh and blood to the type of shit I went through? He asked the demon quietly. Parents are supposed to protect their kids, not put them in a bad situation on purpose. The fox sighed. He knew that his host had insecurities that not even he could alleviate with words. But the demon also knew something the boy had completely overlooked, or rather hadn't thought to look for. The female was lying through her teeth and the kitsune wouldn't stand for it. He could detect a lie or negative intentions in a human a mile away. That's how he knew that Naruto's original belief that people around him now thought differently about him than they had in the past was correct. But he also knew that talking would do no good now. The blonde would never believe that the female was deliberately playing on his weaknesses despite what she had just done. So the demon had to come up with a way to reveal the charade. Naruto had finally gotten to his feet and started rummaging through his fridge for breakfast foods when a plan formed in the kitsune's mind. Kit, I think I should talk to the female, he announced suddenly. Naruto nearly dropped the carton of eggs he was holding. What? You mean personally? Yes. I have some questions and it might also help as she hears my view on things. Naruto mulled the idea over for a moment. But I thought you were angry with her. I don't want you to hurt her, Kyuubi. The demon growled. Angry I may be, but it is beneath me to injure a breeding female. His voice softened slightly. Besides, as far as I am concerned, this kid is as much mine as it is yours. I will see no harm come to it. And it might set her mind at rest to know that. After some consideration, Naruto agreed. I'll let you talk to her, but only if she is okay with the idea. Kyuubi agreed, so the blonde headed back to the bedroom. Jewel was stretched out on the bed when he entered. Although she was still only wrapped in a blanket, he hoped it was a sign that she was feeling better. Jewel. She lifted her head at the sound of her voice and raised a questioning brow. Naruto shifted nervously. He had never told anyone that he and Kyuubi could switch places at times, except for Gaara of course, but the Sand Nin could do the same thing, so it was a moot point where he was concerned. If it's all right with you, He bit his lip before blurting out the rest. Kyuubi would like to talk to you. Jewel blinked owlishly at him for a moment before she laughed mockingly. That's a new one. Excuse me. Oh please, you really expect me to believe that the demon can talk to me like you and I are right now? What kind of an idiot do you take me for? Can I answer that question? Kyuubi asked, his voice deceptively sweet. I don't think so, furball. Naruto replied silently. Aloud he tried to explain. Actually, Kyuubi and I can sort of switch places so that he can talk to other people. Jewel rolled her eyes. You're right. Don't try to pull that one over on me, Uzumaki Naruto. if it wasn't for the fact that there have been people who have seen you use the Kyuubi's power, I wouldn't believe that you even have that thing inside of you. I certainly have never seen any evidence of its presence. Naruto was trying to decide if he had just heard her contradict herself for the second time that morning or if it was just him not paying attention when Jewel pushed up into a sitting position. Folding her arms across her chest, she gave him one of her superior looks that had always annoyed him. If you and that thing can really do the whole trade places thing like you say, then why hasn't it ever tried to talk to me before? Let me take it from here. Kyuubi offered. Naruto was only too happy to oblige the demon. He was starting to get another headache from trying to keep up with his girlfriend's logic. Just keep it low-key, okay? We don't need to have the neighbors freaking out on us. He cautioned the fox. Understood. Jewel smirked when Naruto hung his head. He was always so easy to confuse. But she was a little annoyed at his weird way of trying to talk to her again. Not that she was worried. She always got what she wanted in the end. Really, Naruto, you should think things through before trying to pull one over on me. She snorted. Talk to Kyuubi indeed. Did it ever occur to you, woman, that I have had no desire to address you before this day? She frowned. Naruto's voice suddenly sounded different. It was deeper, darker. She was about to reprimand him for fooling around when his blonde head suddenly snapped up, revealing instead of blue, eyes of crimson. The young woman gasped, slightly taken aback by the sudden change of color. But it wasn't until a red aura started to surround his body that she really started to worry. You have not answered my question, female. He hissed as his canines suddenly became more pronounced and her eyes were drawn to his right hand, which he flexed as he brought it to eye level, showing off the fact that his fingernails had transformed into wickedly sharp claws. The aura started to take shape around his body until he appeared to have pointed ears and 9 waving tails behind him. Enough with the drama, Naruto, cut it out. Jewel ordered. The blonde's transformation was giving her the creeps. Now even I didn't think you were this unintelligent. The transformed young man scoffed before a grin split his face. An involuntary shiver coursed through her body as the sight of all his jagged teeth make him look even more menacing. Naruto, you will address me properly, female. He snapped. You may call me Kyuubi. Jewel gulped as he came towards her, menace oozing from every fiber of his being. As much as she wanted to, she couldn't deny that the person in front of her was not Naruto. She had never once been afraid of Naruto, even if she had pretended to be a time or two. But this being terrified her. Kyuubi knew the instant that the female in front of him fully understood who he was. Seeing as I loathe associating with you, I will make this brief. He announced, moving to stand at the foot of the bed. He was very satisfied to see her scramble back to the wall, putting as much distance between them as she could while trying to keep her wrap in place. As much as I despise your person, my host does not, so I will not harm you. He stated, not wanting her to panic and alert others of his presence. He watched her eyes widen even more as she continued to stare at him. Satisfied that he had her undivided attention, he continued. However, I want it clear that the true reason I am addressing you is because of the kid you carry. The fact that you are an inferior female no longer has any bearing. My presence within my host should make up for any shortcomings you may have passed on to the offspring. It took Jewel a few moments to decipher exactly what it was he was talking about, but was still too terrified to speak as the demon continued. You will see to it that the kid is born safe and healthy. Red eyes narrowed. If you value your life. Hey, Kyuubi, you're scaring her. Naruto objected from within the recesses of his own mind. The kitsune ignored him. Jewel finally found her voice, even though it came out in a whimper. I want to talk to Naruto. Kyuubi snorted. Why? So you can twist him to your every whim with your lies. She gasped and shrank back even more. I don't do that, came the weak protest. And I suppose that the reputation you get for being his partner isn't the only reason you stay with him either. Kyuubi growled. Kyuubi. Naruto warned his tenant. That's enough. Not nearly. The demon replied, turning his attention back to the female before him. That's not true. Jewel snapped, having finally gained back some of her nerve. After all, the creature had promised not to harm her. Kyuubi growled, his tails whipped back and forth in anger. Perhaps not completely. He conceded. There is also the fact that you love to control my host. I'm sure it gives one as insignificant as you an illusion of power. Jewel sputtered in rage at his accusations, her eyes sparking like fire as she moved forward onto her hands and knees. You have no right to talk to me like that, you filthy beast. She screamed. The two of you shouldn't even be on the loose. And as for your demands, I really don't give a shit what you want, I am not giving birth to another monster. Kyubi watched with narrowed eyes as she started to awkwardly scramble off the bed. But he did nothing to stop her furious tirade. As far as the fox was concerned, his host needed to see the truth once and for all, even if he could feel the pain it caused the young man. No one wants another demon around, especially not me. And if I have to slit my own throat to make sure of that, so be it. She spat as her feet touched the floor. It was then that the demon struck. Moving faster than the eye could see, he appeared in front of the girl and grabbed her by the throat, lifting her off the ground with one clawed hand. Jewel struggled frantically. Her hands tried in vain to pry the fingers from her neck. Kyubi slowly drew her closer until their noses nearly touched. Even my kind would never stoop so low as to threaten a kit. He hissed before slamming her body back onto the bed. His aura flared dangerously as he followed her down, pinning her body down with his own despite Naruto's violent protests. Only someone as brainless as you would make me repeat myself. The demon rumbled. You will do nothing to jeopardize the kit. When Jewel glared at him, he smiled viciously before continuing. If you are still considering taking your own pitiful existence at the same time, let me warn you. Should you die, I will follow you to hell and drag you back to the living world. That statement had the double effect of stunning Naruto into silence while Jewel stared at him in terror. Do not try me on this woman, for if I am forced to retrieve your soul. He paused as he released his hold on her neck and traced his claws lightly down and along her collarbone. Your life will be mine to do with as I please. A whimper escaped the girl's throat. I think we can all agree that my host's proposal is the best for all concerned. After the birth you will be free to go as you please. With that said, Kyubi pushed himself back off the bed. Once he was standing, his lips curled in a grin that was just as menacing as the first on he gave her. I trust we will not have to speak of this again. He eyed the female's trembling form for a moment. Her lack of a reply satisfied him. His job was done. Red eyes closed and the haze surrounding his body began to dissipate. What the hell do you think you were doing? Naruto demanded as he switched with his tenant. What was necessary? The demon replied before curling up as if to go to sleep. I'm not done talking to you, Kyubi. The blonde growled. And I'm not going anywhere, Kit. The fox snorted. Why don't you care for your female? She seems a little upset. The amusement was clear in his voice. I will still be here for you to yell at once you are done. Naruto's head jerked up, his eyes focusing on his girlfriend's prone figure. Jewel. He was instantly at her side, kneeling on the mattress. Are you okay? I'm so sorry, he promised not to hurt you. Worried by her lack of response, he checked her throat for any damage caused by the kitsune. He was surprised to see that there wasn't a single bruise or scratch anywhere to be seen. Jewel, talk to me, sweetheart. Her wide sapphire eyes started to fill with tears. It tore at Naruto's heart to see her so upset. Carefully he pulled her into his arms, cradling her against his chest. The emotions coursing through him were a mad jumble, everything from anger, despair, relief and uncertainty. He had no idea what to do. Kyubi had revealed things that the fox had never bothered to bring to his attention before. He wasn't sure if he should be grateful for the revelations the demon's conversation with Jewel brought out, or furious that his last illusions and dreams concerning his relationship had been so brutally shattered. He was pulled from his thoughts when Jewel stirred. Naruto. Her voice was a faint whisper as she clung to his shirt. I'm right here, Jewel. Is that thing really inside of you? Yeah, he is. I'm sorry that he scared you. I promise I won't let him out again. Kyubi snorted at that, but the blonde ignored him. Jewel then started to cry, finally giving into the shock and fear caused by the encounter with the nine tails. At last, real tears. Kyubi remarked sarcastically. I was beginning to think she was incapable of shedding an honest tear. Naruto chose not to reply, but the remark cut the young man deeply. How could he have been so wrong about the woman that he loved? After what seemed like hours, Jewel fell asleep against him and he moved to lay down with her still in his arms. He had no idea what would happen once she woke up. Much to Naruto's relief, Jewel did not wake up screaming mad as he had been sure she would. The only objection she voiced was to his close proximity. She had never liked cuddling, saying it made her feel claustrophobic. It wasn't until after Naruto made breakfast and she had eaten it without a word that the young man's relief turned to worry. Jewel was not the silent type, but despite his best efforts he couldn't get her to talk to him. It was his day off, so they spent it undisturbed. She didn't object when he asked her to spend the night, and even allowed him to pull her close before they fell asleep. The next day he reluctantly walked her home before reporting for duty. He didn't want to appear controlling, but the thought of what she might do when left alone had him terrified. Training that day did not go well as he was too distracted to focus. After spending most of the day basically being a punching bag for his friends and trying to avoid answering the various questions being thrown at him, Kyuubi finally got fed up with him and offered to teach him how to put a protection spell on Jewel so that she couldn't harm herself even if she tried, which the kitsune was very confident she wouldn't after his warning. Naruto reluctantly agreed after returning for Jewel and finding her in seemingly good spirits. It was more for his own peace of mind, he decided, and when the fox mentioned that it would also help protect her and their son in case any of his enemies found out about their relationship and tried to harm her, he was all for it. After the couple went out to dinner, Jewel agreed to spend the night again, providing sleep was the only thing on the agenda, as she claimed exhaustion from working while her body was trying to recover from her suicide attempt. The spell was put in place while she slept, leaving Naruto feeling much better about her safety, but feeling a little guilty for having done so without telling her about it. "I would say this makes you even," was Kyuubi's comment. "Just try to relax and focus on the offspring." Naruto took his tenant's advice, and for a week and a half everything went well. Jewel seemed to rebound and was more her usual self, if a little more subdued than in the past. They spent every night in each other's arms, Naruto often staying awake long into the night listening to the sound of his son's heartbeat. With the demon's help he was almost able to see the developing fetus in his mind's eye, and he found it to be the most amazing thing he had ever encountered. When orders came for a mission that would take him away from Konoha for over a week, he was very reluctant to go. Jewel, however, just teased him for being overly protective and sent him on his way with a sound kiss, the first since before she had told him about her pregnancy, and promised that everything would be fine while he was gone. 2 weeks later the fox boy returned, eager to see both of them again, only to find that his girlfriend was gone without a trace. A visit to Tsunade revealed that Jewel had resigned as a Konoha ninja and turned in her Hit. None of her friends or family had any idea where she had gone. Most of her belongings had been left behind. She had simply vanished. End flashback. Temari was dumbfounded by the story Naruto told her. She just left. Did you ever find her? Naruto shook his head. His whole body seemed to droop in defeat. We looked, but not long after that was when Itachi attacked, so the search had to be put off until we defeated the bastard. Temari nodded her understanding. She remembered that time. It had been the first time she had seen Naruto unleash the Kyuubi's power while fighting Kisame. She remembered wondering at the time what could have caused the normally laid-back Uzumaki to fight so viciously, but had assumed it was because Itachi and his Akatsuki were threatening his best friend Sasuke and the Uchiha's new family. Now she suspected that that wasn't the only reason. Moving closer, the Kunoichi hesitantly reached out and placed a hand on his arm. "So you don't know what happened to them?" she asked softly, remembering the words of Hinata earlier that day about feeling better after talking about things. And the Sand Nin was pretty sure that from the sounds of it that Naruto had never broken his vow of silence. Until now. "Oh, I know what happened," he replied hoarsely. "They're dead." A wave of pain crossed his features as he said the words. Temari gasped slightly. "How do you know?" He closed his eyes as he bowed his head. "I felt it." Temari could only gape at him, not having any idea what to say. "The only thing that kept me going while fighting the damn Akatsuki was this feeling. It was like a connection that Kyuubi said was the bond I had with them, probably because of the protection spell. Then a couple months later it vanished." He supplied, even though it sounded like he was talking more to himself than to her. "But what if that was just the spell wearing off?" Temari protested. She didn't really have any idea why she felt the need to relieve his pain. She had enough of her own to worry about. But she ignored that little fact and focused instead on the man in front of her. "You didn't stop looking just because of that, did you?" Naruto's lips curved for a moment into a sad smile, one that was reflected in his dull eyes once he opened them to look at her again. No, I didn't stop. I still haven't. Then once again more to himself he mumbled. I probably never will. It was then that the young man seemed to suddenly realize what he was doing, and a blush covered his cheeks, barely visibly in the dim light. Sorry. I shouldn't be keeping you up for something like this, you need your rest. With that he started to turn away from her. Temari immediately latched onto his arm, stopping him. Wait, Naruto, Her voice trailed off. She really had no idea what to say. He turned his face back to her, a sad but resigned look on his face. It's okay. It's not your problem, sorry to bother you. Temari's stubbornness chose that moment to reassert itself. Her grip on his arm tightened enough to hold him in place. Am I the only one you've told about this? She asked, although she was pretty sure of the answer. I don't usually bother anyone with my problems. It's been a bad day, I didn't mean to dump this on you. Temari gritted her teeth. If he apologized one more time, she was pretty sure she was going to slap him. She couldn't explain where the urge came from, but it was there nonetheless. I really think you should have told someone sooner. She commented as gently as she could. Once the words were out of her mouth, she could have kicked herself for saying them. And have the council find out. That would have caused mass hysteria. He scoffed. Temari moved to stand directly in front of him. That's not true, she protested. Naruto didn't seem to hear her. Jewel was right about one thing. No one wants another me around. He mumbled, his voice shaky. Naruto. Temari had never really tried to comfort anyone before, and words failed her yet again, so she decided to just go on instinct. Reaching up, she gently cupped his face in her hands. His blue eyes that were normally so bright were now dark and haunted as they caught and held hers for a moment before he once again hung his head. His body started to quiver as a sob issued from his throat. But I did, he whispered, his voice cracking. I wanted him so much. Naruto's big body started to shake as he finally broke. Tears streamed down his face as sobs racked his frame. Temari stepped closer and wrapped her arms around his waist, holding him tightly as she fought tears of her own. For a few moments Naruto struggled to control his wayward emotions, but as Temari pulled him close to her small frame in an attempt to comfort him, something no one had ever done in his life, he lost the fight. Burying his face in her neck and wrapping his arms around her, he allowed the tears to fall. And for the first time in 6 years, the sunny blonde Konoha shinobi allowed himself to grieve for the loss of his son. Several hours later, Temari lay awake in bed watching the man in her arms while he slept. She now had an idea of how Naruto must have felt at times during the last week when she had broken down or freaked out. It was frustrating, not really being able to do anything more than offer a shoulder to cry on. The kunoichi couldn't fathom the depths of the pain the usually sunny blonde had been living with for so long, and yet had somehow managed to always appear happy and carefree. She had no idea how long she had stood, simply holding him close after he broke down. But she couldn't believe that after his tears had dried that he had profusely apologized for being so much trouble and would have taken off somewhere by himself if she hadn't dragged him into the bedroom and ordered him into bed, where she had climbed in as well and once again wrapped her arms around him and pulled him close. He had resisted at first, insisting that he didn't want to bother her with his problems, at which point she had told him to shut up and call them even. Despite his initial protests, Naruto was asleep in minutes and was soon resting against her right side with his head on her shoulder and his arms wrapped around her. Even though she too was feeling drained from dealing with so many unfamiliar emotions, Temari was having a difficult time falling asleep herself. Her head was too busy trying to understand how someone could be as cruel as this Jewel woman had been to simply walk away from someone like Naruto without so much as a note or an explanation. After being together for so long, then trying to kill herself just to get back at him didn't make sense. Because of what she herself had been through the last 2 days, Temari could understand the initial fear an unplanned pregnancy could cause, but to go about it the way Jewel had was inexcusable. The Sand Kunoichi really had the urge to kill something right about then, but at the same time she was horrified that she had almost done the same thing, may have in fact tried to kill herself in that moment of hysteria if Naruto hadn't been there to stop her and literally shake some sense into her head. Her left hand slid down under the covers until it rested against the still flat contours of her belly. I'm sorry for even thinking such thoughts, little one. She whispered softly. Once again Temari felt tears gather in her eyes as she smoothed an unruly lock of hair away from Naruto's haggard face. He had saved her life, quite possibly twice in fact, as well as the life of her unborn child that in a matter of half a day had become more important to her than anything ever had. Silently the tears started to stream down her face as she watched him sleep. How ironic it was, she thought that the man who had saved her as well as so many other people, was in desperate need of being saved himself. Pulling him closer, Temari closed her eyes and for the first time in her life wept for someone else. The sun slowly rose in the east. For the first time in 5 days it shone down on the peaceful desert of Suna. The Konoha messenger was pleased when he woke to find the desert finally back to normal. Quickly breaking camp, the Leaf Shinobi set out across the desert at a fast pace. He had been detained longer than he liked and he knew his lack of return to Konoha would be noticed very soon. Running with chakra focused on his feet to prevent sinking in the soft sand, he could not help but feel as if he was being watched. Even though he could feel no other chakra signature in the area, he felt uneasy. The barren landscape around him was unnaturally quiet, like a predator was lying in wait for him. Keeping his senses sharp, he maintained his pace, all the while hoping that he made it to Suna without incident. All the citizens breathed a sigh of relief when they woke to discover the storm finally over. None more so than Kankuro. The puppet master had not expected Gaara's temper tantrum, for lack of any other description, to last a full 5 days. He wondered how his sibling was faring after expending so much chakra for an extended period of time. The painted Junin decided to wait for a time before going in search of his brother. Gaara did not like to be seen in a moment of weakness and Kankuro was sure that this was one of those moments. If it was anyone else, I'm sure they would be dead, he muttered to himself as he sat at the Kazukage's desk, absently running his left index finger up and down the side of his face. He knew that Gaara was not dead, he would have felt it if his brother had perished. The same went for his older sibling, although he had no idea what had become of her, he knew she was alive somewhere. You better get your ass back here soon, little brother, we need to find Temari. He growled aloud to the empty room. The storm had finally ended. The desert sand once again lay in intricate waves and rolling dunes. To the south of Suna, buried beneath 30 feet of sand, the body of the exhausted Kazkage lay in a small domed cavern. His chakra depleted, emotionally and physically drained, he slept to regain his strength. The Tanuki, Shukaku, also slumbered, being as equally drained as his host. His last remnants of power saw to it that the shifting sands kept a supply of breathable air inside the dome, to keep the redhead alive. It would take several days before either of them recovered enough to move. Temari woke to find herself alone in bed. Naruto was nowhere to be seen. A glance at the bedside clock, which read 9:32, made her decide that he must have already headed to work. Although how he found the energy to do so after last night was beyond her. Taking a deep breath, the San Kunoichi admitted that she still felt drained after the late night events and decided to stay in bed as long as she could. She knew that she still had a lot of things to think about and decide on because of yesterday's decision. But even though she was sure it was the right one and what she wanted, it was still intimidating and she honestly had no idea where to start. Her mind drifted instead back to Naruto and the story he had told. How could anyone treat him like that? She wondered again. The wind user was rather disappointed that the woman named Jewel, whom she had never laid eyes on, was no longer among the living. Not for Naruto's sake, as far as Temari was concerned he could do way better, but she would dearly love to rip the woman's throat out for what she had done. Poor Naruto, he would be such an amazing father, and to lose his son like that. Not knowing what really happened to him. Another sigh escaped her. Well, that's it. I'm definitely not going to retract my request for him to be my little one's godfather. I just hope he accepts. Nodding to herself, she had to wonder why she had never noticed how her blonde savior always seemed to put everyone else before himself. Not that that was necessarily a bad thing, but it seemed to her after last night's revelations that he did it a little too much and it was time to change that. A soft smile touched her lips. Yes, she would be glad to help him out. It was the least she could do after everything he had done for her. Besides, it will help keep me from going stir crazy from all the stuff I have to decide on and plan out. Sometimes focusing on someone else's problems helped lessen the worry of your own, she decided. Now the hard part was going to be figuring out how to go about doing this. She had never really been that good at helping people with their problems, unless of course the problem was something she could kill. A movement by the bedroom door had her head snapping up to see what it was. Temari's mouth dropped open when she saw Naruto standing rather awkwardly under the door frame with what appeared to be a breakfast tray in his hands. Naruto shifted uncomfortably as his house guest continued to stare at him while pushing herself into a sitting position. Sorry. Thought you were still sleeping. A slight blush crept up his neck. I made you breakfast. The big blonde muttered. He seemed to be looking everywhere but at her, and Temari had to hide her smile when his stance reminded her of a child who had been caught doing something wrong. A moment later she didn't like that comparison at all. His demeanor had her wondering if this is how he had learned to act around his missing girlfriend to avoid the bitch's temper. So she tried to be as cheerful as possible and not think of the other woman because that would just make her mad. I thought you had left for work already. She commented lightly, propping pillows up behind her. I kind of have some unofficial time off. He supplied, taking a hesitant step into the room. You really don't need to cook for me, Naruto. She smiled and beckoned him to come closer. As much as I appreciate it, it isn't necessary. Yes it is. He countered. Couldn't think of anything else I could do to apologize for last night. Temari's mouth opened to tell him there was no need but was quickly cut off. Thank you. He mumbled, once again not looking directly at her. Crawling out from under the covers, Temari moved to kneel on the edge of the bed where she relieved him of the breakfast tray. Barely sparing a glance to its contents, she set it on the bed, then captured both his hands with her own. Naruto, there is no need to thank me. Gently squeezing his hands, she waited for him to look at her before continuing. After everything you have done for me, it's the least I could do. He still seemed a little embarrassed about the whole thing, so Temari decided to try to lighten the mood. She had a lot of questions that she wanted to ask, but they could wait for a while. Not used to having to put someone else at ease, she had to think for a moment for a way to change the subject. Out of the corner of her eye she spotted the breakfast tray he had brought in for her, and it gave her the inspiration she needed. Have you eaten yet? She asked. No. At his reply she smiled brightly. Then why don't you bring your food in here too, and we can both have breakfast in bed, since you said you don't have to go anywhere. Naruto hesitated, having been caught off guard by the invitation. Temari picked up on it immediately. Please Naruto, I would like to talk to you for a while. At first she thought he would refuse, but finally he nodded his head and offered a small smile of his own. Sure, why not? Temari grinned. Good. Go get your food, I'll wait for you. It wasn't long before the two of them were sitting propped up against the headboard by multiple pillows. Naruto seemed to have an overabundance of pillows on hand, some of which he pulled out from under the bed. When Temari commented on that fact, the big shinobi just shrugged. I like to be comfortable. Temari grinned at that. She could definitely understand that sentiment. Silence fell as the two began digging into the waffles and berries Naruto had made. The kunoichi was about to take her first bite when a rather funny picture flashed through her mind. She clamped a hand over her mouth in an effort to stifle the giggle that erupted. Glancing sideways, she saw her companion giving her a funny look. What's so funny? He asked, confused. I don't know where it came from, but I just had a flash of Gaara curled up in a mountain of pillows so that only his head was peeking out. She giggled again. Naruto quirked a brow at her, obviously not understanding what she was getting at. Gaara's bed is as hard as a rock. She quickly explained. As far as I know, he doesn't even use a pillow. His lips twitched slightly as he too conjured up the image of the Kazekage in a mountain of fluffy pads. I see what you mean. It's not exactly him, is it? Temari grinned broadly. Now add pink ruffles to said pillows. Naruto roared with laughter at the thought. Temari joined him and the two laughed until they had tears in their eyes. Although both parties admitted it wasn't very nice to be poking fun at the extremely serious sand user, it did lighten the mood considerably, and they went back to eating feeling much more relaxed than before. Once the food was consumed and the tray and dishes set aside, the couple relaxed back into the pillows. Neither one seemed to notice that Temari was still in the shorts and t-shirt she used for sleeping, or that Naruto only wore sweatpants. They were both far too comfortable in each other's company for the thought to even register with either one of them. Temari finally decided it was time for her to ask some of the questions that had been nagging at her. Naruto, do you mind if I ask you something about last night? He winced slightly at the reminder but reluctantly nodded. I guess not. You really have never told anyone else about Jewel or your son, have you? She knew he had said as much in a roundabout way the night before, but she wanted to be sure. No, I promised. His voice was quiet, but she was glad at least that he wasn't looking away from her like he had before. So you've been looking for them all by yourself? He shook his head. Sasuke helped for a while, but then like I said Itachi showed up and by the time we were done with him there was a lot of other stuff that needed to be done so he couldn't come with me very often. And he doesn't know. It really surprised her that his best friend would be in the dark about something like that. No, all I told him and Tsunade that I wanted to know why she left so I was trying to find her. Temari shook her head in amazement. And even after all this time you haven't found any trace of them? Another shake of his head. When I was still Anbu I covered most of the continent on missions, but never found a thing. The sorrow in his voice brought tears to her eyes. I'm sorry Naruto, that should never happen to anyone. He shrugged. That's the life of a demon vessel. No matter what you do it's never enough to make people stop hating you. Temari frowned as she wiped her eyes. That's just stupid. I can't believe you still get treated like that. Like yesterday for instance, I can't believe the Hokage or the Anbu believed that report for a moment. Naruto shifted slightly, stretching out on the bed. They didn't. It's their job to look into any allegations, no matter who they are directed at. Temari snorted. I don't believe that. You were an Anbu yourself, for crying out loud. The guy who wrote that stupid report I can see, but the captain. You must have worked with him at one point, how could he think that of you? She demanded, too agitated to relax as Naruto was. I did work with him, he's a good man. He commented. Temari gave him a skeptical look so he continued. I would have done the same thing in his place. You would? Yeah. Consider the track record of Konoha for a second. We have had a number of elite shinobi go rouge and it's come back to haunt us. Orochimaru, Kabuto, Itachi and even Sasuke for a time. As a commander of the Anbu it would be stupid to purposefully overlook a report and risk it coming back to bite you in the butt. He paused, giving her a half smile. Especially if it concerns someone like me. Temari shook her head as she finally lay back against the pillows again. I don't know how you can be so easy on them. I also don't understand how there could still be people who hate you. You have never been bloodthirsty like Gaara, and yet both Suna and Konoha have accepted him willingly since he's changed, even if you still have to watch out for his temper. If they can do that for him, then why not for you? Naruto sighed heavily. Unlike Kyuubi, Shukaku never attacked and killed almost half a village, not to mention a most beloved leader. But still, he interrupted her protest. No buts. Sometimes people have a hard time letting go of their hate and fear. This is one of those times. It's the way things are. And just because most of Konoha still hates me doesn't mean I'm going to return the favor. I wasn't suggesting that you do. She intoned quietly. I just don't think it's fair. Naruto snorted. Life's not fair. That's how it is. Temari slid down so that she was laying on her right side and propped her head up on her hand. How do you manage to stay so upbeat all the time? Naruto took a few minutes to answer, but then decided that as long as he was being honest he might as well stick with it. I'm a good actor. Everyone expects me to be all smiles and goofing off. Konoha's #1 hyperactive ninja, so that's what I do. It's exhausting. He admitted, closing his eyes. So why did it? Temari inquired. She was really curious, as she was starting to think that her life, as crazy as it had suddenly gotten, was nothing compared to what he had to deal with his whole life. It's what I've always done. He finally responded. If I changed now it would freak people out, and I just got the council to get over the incident with Sound about a year ago. I don't need them in an uproar again. Temari shook her head. Man, have I missed a lot of gossip. I should have come to visit more often. Naruto cracked open one eye to look at her. That's not a very good reason to visit. Besides, gossip isn't all that reliable anyway. I beg to differ. I run a lot departments in Suna, and let me tell you, there are times that I know stuff before even Gaara does. The word of mouth chain in unbelievable sometimes. HN was his only reply as his eye slid closed again. Temari regarded his silently for a while. Are you feeling better? Better than what? Blue eyes opened to glance at her curiously. Better than last night. Yesterday Hinata told me that talking about stuff helped. I didn't believe her at first, but by the time we were done I did feel better. Naruto folded his arms behind his head and stared at the ceiling for a while as he thought about her question. He was surprised to find that he did in fact feel better, lighter. He had so much stuff bottled up inside that it was nice to let some of it out. I guess I do feel better. He finally admitted aloud. Even if I did break a promise. Temari rolled her eyes. She wasn't going to say what she thought of the stupid promise that he had for some reason kept for so many years. So what about you? He suddenly asked, changing the subject. What about me? She inquired, unsure what he was referring to. How did you go from totally freaking out the other night to deciding to keep your baby? Temari blushed slightly at the reminder. I can't believe I went off the deep end like that. She mumbled, rather embarrassed over the whole display. It amazes me that you've been taking this whole thing as well as you have. Temari shrugged at that. Well, I was told at a young age that this could happen to me one day. I guess that might be why I've dealt with it differently than others would. When you go through most of your life just waiting for something horrible to happen and trying to prevent it, when it finally does you're kind of like, well, now that that's over, and just get on with it. Naruto gave her a strange look. That doesn't make any sense. Temari cocked her head thoughtfully. You're right, it doesn't, does it? I really can't explain it. My emotions and reactions have been all mixed up since you found me. I don't really know what's going on with me. So you might change your mind. Naruto stated quietly. It was her turn to give him a look. About what? Having an abortion. Temari almost snapped at him before she realized that after what he had been through it was logical for him to think that way. I won't change my mind about that. She assured him gently. I really want this baby. I've always wanted kids and I guess I realized that this was finally my chance for that. The stunned look on Naruto's face made her smile. And I have you and Hinata to thank for helping me decide. What did I do? He asked after a lengthy silence. You made sure I stopped and actually thought everything through at a time when I was a little freaked out. She explained. You make it sound so easy. He muttered, his eyes once again glued to the ceiling. Oh, it wasn't easy at all. Yesterday morning I was totally depressed, then Hinata came over and at first she pissed me off with all of her questions. But she forced me to look at all my options and made me promise not to keep the little one just because it was a duty. She said a child deserves a home full of love and acceptance, not duty and resentment. And she's right. Hinata usually is. Naruto muttered, still staring at the ceiling. So she knows the truth then, does she? Yes. He glanced sideways at her. You still haven't said why you came to this decision. He commented. Temari sighed as she pulled a pillow down to lay her head on. It wasn't easy. I felt like I was going in circles. I must have gone over my conversations with you and Hinata at least 100 times. Every time I thought about terminating the pregnancy or even giving the baby up once it was born, I got this heavy lump in my gut and I felt sick over it. Really? Naruto rolled onto his side so that they were now laying facing each other. Temari smiled slightly. But I was worried about keeping it too, so many things ran through my head. What if I ended up hating the baby and blaming it for what happened to me? The list seemed endless. What would people think if they found out? And so on. Her smile turned peaceful and content then. But then I remembered what you said about it being innocent and not having anything to do with what happened, and I realized that you were right and that I would have no problem loving something that is a part of me. She shrugged then. Besides, I've always known that if I was going to have children it would be alone. No man could put up with me and my two brothers. Naruto could only stare at her in wonder. As she spoke she suddenly had this softness about her, like she had found an inner peace that helped her overlook how she had been treated. You're an amazing woman, Temari. He told her. She smiled again and reached over to take one of his hands in hers. I couldn't have done it without you, Naruto, thank you. The sunny blonde shinobi tried to return her smile. He really did, but all he could think of was how much he wished that Jewel could have been more like her. Temari saw the dark cloud that covered his features and she was pretty sure she knew what he was thinking about. I'm sorry, Naruto, she whispered softly, entwining her fingers with his. Jolted out of his musings he gave her a confused look. For what? Because of all this stuff I keep reminding you of painful memories, I'm sorry. It's not our fault. I'm the one who kept refusing to deal with how I felt even though Kyuubi kept nagging me about it. I should have known that the day would come when everything exploded. He sighed heavily then. I hate it when the furball is right. He muttered more to himself than to her. But the kunoichi heard him nonetheless, and it brought another question to mind. What you told those women the other day, about sealing away Kyuubi. Is it true? Yeah, it is. But I thought you had merged like Gaara and his demon. We did, a long time ago, but after all the shit that happened with Jewel as well as a few other things, we started arguing all the time and I finally got mad and refused to talk to him ever again. That was probably about 5 years ago now. He sighed heavily before continuing. Then out of the blue he started yakking at me again and I finally couldn't handle it anymore, so I sealed him. Temari frowned. How is it possible to seal something that you've merged with? She asked in confusion. Naruto opened his mouth to answer, then closed it again with a frown to match hers. I never really thought about that before, I just did. I can't feel or hear him at all, even though some of his power must still be with me because I still heal faster than normal people do. After thinking that over for a few minuets, she accepted his rather vague answer. There were just some things that even as ninja they couldn't explain. Why are you so mad at him anyway? Temari asked next. Naruto had to think about that for a few minutes as well before replying. A bunch of it was what happened with Jewel, I guess. To tell you the truth, I'm not really sure anymore. He admitted rather sheepishly. Then why hold a grudge for so long? She prodded. I can't answer that, he admitted after a moment. Maybe I'm mad at myself and keep aiming it at him, or maybe it's just easier to be angry with someone who's around rather than someone who's not. I just don't know anymore. Temari decided to leave it at that and change the subject. Kyuubi was very pleased with the conversation he was listening in on. He lay stretched out on his belly, chin resting on crossed paws with his 9 tails spread out around him. He had always liked this female, and for more than the power he sensed in her. She struck him as being an intelligent and highly adaptive creature, and he always enjoyed being proven right. But what he was happiest about was how quickly his host had confided in her. The fox could feel the tension started to ease out of the young man's body as the two spoke. Definitely mate material, the kitsune remarked to himself. The demon knew that the bonds that had formed around the two without their knowledge were already beginning to tighten. It wouldn't be long before they were forever bound together. Both of them assuring the other that their secrets would be kept by the other only confirmed that fact for him. As the two of them fell asleep facing each other, hands still joined, the fox smiled and closed his eyes as well. Despite the new barrier between them, he was not immune to the emotional rollercoaster his vessel had been on for the last 36 hours. It had been exhausting. The couple woke up again just after 2 o'clock that afternoon. Naruto decided that he had better head to the office to catch up on the paperwork he had abandoned the day before so that he wouldn't have to work on the weekend. After taking turns in the shower, the two of them headed for Ichiraku's for something to eat. Neither of them wanted to cook again, and Temari wanted to get out of the house and stretch her legs. Naruto was ravenous despite the large breakfast he had made. He had barely eaten the day before and his body was sorely in need of energy. He put away half a dozen bowls of miso before deciding it was enough to hold him until super. Temari made it halfway through a second bowl of veggie ramen, so he ended up finishing it for her as well. The two had enjoyed a comfortable silence throughout their meal. Neither one noticed the relief on the owner's face when it became evident that Naruto had his usual appetite back. Temari did her best not to laugh when the sunny-haired blonde went to pay for their meal and ended up in an argument with the owner who insisted that it was on the house. Naruto turning down free ramen. Did hell freeze over without someone telling me? A deep voice drawled from behind them. Temari turned to see Naruto's former sensei Hatake Kakashi standing casually with his hands stuffed into his pockets just inside the ramen stand. Beside him stood a black-haired man with a scar across his nose. The Sanjunin was sure she knew him but couldn't think of his name. Said man had a worried frown of his face as he watched her companion haggle over the price of their lunch. Kakashi, however, addressed Temari. Sabaku no Temari. I had heard you were in town. It is good to see you again. He smiled gently at the blonde woman who nodded in greeting. You as well, Kakashi-san, it has been a while. She agreed. Meanwhile, Naruto had finally settled on paying for half the bill after repeatedly assuring the stand's owner that nothing had been wrong with the food he had abandoned the previous day. Upon turning around, he realized that he and Temari were no longer alone. "Uruka, Kakashi, good to see you." A slight frown crossed his face as he stepped up to the silver-haired Junin. "How is your arm?" he asked quietly. "Good as new," Kakashi assured him. "Tsunade fixed me right up. Nothing to worry about." "I'm really sorry about that," Naruto mumbled. As Temari listened to the conversation, she wondered why the copy nin had addressed the Hokage so informally, but since no one else seemed to notice, she didn't comment. "Don't sweat it." Kakashi made a waving motion with one hand. "But you are out of a sparring partner for a while," he informed the blonde with a smirk evident beneath his mask. "Strict orders from my medic." Uruka just shook his head when Naruto demanded to know why he couldn't spar if he was supposedly good as new. The Chunin teacher turned his attention to the Sand Kunoichi. "I don't believe we have been formally introduced to Temari-san. I'm Yumino Uruka." Temari returned his bow with a nod. "No, I don't think we have, but I have heard much about you, Yumino-san. It is good to meet you." Uruka smiled, and Temari was surprised to find that she didn't feel threatened by him in the least. She filed that information away for later consideration. "So Naruto tells me that you have been staying with him," Uruka commented. "I hope he has been a good host." The original defensiveness she felt at the beginning of his words was quickly relieved when she saw the genuine concern on his face. "He has been great," she assured the Chunin. It was then that she recalled that she had heard that Uruka was like a father to her blonde savior, and she could see for herself that he cared a great deal about the young man. "In fact, his cooking is good enough to tempt me to stay for a while," she half joked. Uruka grinned at that. "Well, I'm glad to hear that. I never thought he would get the hang of it when he was younger." Temari grinned as well. That comment didn't surprise her in the slightest. The two then turned their attention back to the arguing pair next to them, not that they could be said to be actually arguing since Naruto was the only one saying anything, although it was at a volume that made up for the silver-haired man's near silence. "What do you mean Kiba's in the hospital? I barely touched him. A concussion is nothing to sniff at," Kakashi replied in a bland voice. "Lee, Sasuke and Neji will be equally unable to train with you." Naruto visibly paled and took a step away from his former sensei. Temari wondered what the two were talking about. Their whole conversation had her baffled when Uruka stepped in between them to mediate. "Kakashi, quit messing with him," he ordered before turning to Naruto. "He means for a couple of days, Sasuke and Neji area accompanying Lee on his first assignment since the baby was born. They're not expected back for a few days." Naruto breathed a sigh of relief before glaring at Kakashi. "You can be such an ass sometimes." The copy nin just grinned. "That's what Uruka tells me." Temari meanwhile made a mental note to ask for an explanation for the entire conversation later on, as the teacher then offered to join Naruto at the training grounds as a sparring partner. "Really?" Naruto's eyes lit up. "Man, it's been forever. That would be great. My only stipulation is that it be after 9. Uruka informed him. "It's the first Saturday since the academy let out and I intend to sleep in." Naruto laughed and agreed before moving back to Temari's side, where he unconsciously wrapped an arm around her waist. "Well, I better get to work. I'll walk you home, Temari." The Sand Kunoichi gave a slightly dramatic sigh as she turned in his embrace so that she could drape her right arm over his shoulder from behind him while remaining pressed against his side. "Like I said earlier, Naruto, I'm perfectly capable of walking on my own." Naruto frowned. "But I'll be fine," she assured him, placing a finger on his lips to silence his protest. "You said yourself that you probably have a mountain of paperwork waiting for you." He rolled his eyes at the reminder. "Yeah, I guess," he agreed reluctantly. And yet neither one moved from where they stood, completely oblivious to the fact that they were wrapped in each other's arms and had a very curious audience watching every move they made. After a few moments, Naruto reluctantly loosened his hold on Temari and shifted away from her slightly. "If you need anything, I'll be fine," she assured him again as she brushed some imaginary lint from his shoulder before withdrawing her touch as well. "I'll try not to be late," he promised her, taking a half step back. "But if I am," again he was silenced with a touch to his lips. "I will be waiting," she assured him quietly. She somehow sensed that he needed to be reassured even after their morning talk, or perhaps because of it. A soft smile curved his lips. I'll see you soon then. She shook her head at him. You say that, but you're still here. She teased, giving him a playful push. I'm going. But instead of moving away, he captured her hands and stepped forward, where he dropped a quick peck on her forehead. Take it easy. I will, she promised him. With that, he released her, turned on his heel, and headed out of the ramen stand. See ya, Aruka, Kakashi, he called as he jogged off, completely missing the two older men's slack-jawed stares. Temari also missed the looks following her host as she politely bid the two-leaf shinobi a good day before heading towards Naruto's apartment. Are you thinking what I'm thinking? Aruka asked once he found his tongue. Kakashi folded his arms and nodded. Yup, for once Tsunade was right. They stood silently for a few moments until suddenly Aruka threw a fist into the air. Yes, causing Kakashi to jump at the sudden and very unusual gesture. What was that for? He asked, not sure if he really wanted to hear the answer. This means that Naruto might actually be considering settling down. The scar-faced teacher explained with a grin on his face big enough to rival Guy's. Kakashi groaned and covered his eye with one hand. Don't tell me, let me guess. He muttered in despair. You're already seeing grandkids running around, aren't you? He peeked through split fingers to see Aruka practically bouncing with glee. You're as bad as Tsunade. The copy nin muttered as he once again stuffed his hands in his pockets and stepped out onto the street with Aruka following close behind. You realize that, I hate kids act of yours doesn't fool anyone. The teacher informed him as they walked side by side. Oh really? Really? I mean, come on, the day Sasuke's oldest boy was born you threw one of the biggest parties Konoha has ever seen. The silver-haired man barely batted an eye. That was only because he was the first of my students to have children. Now I know better after meeting the rest of his little monsters. Aruka gave him a raised eyebrow look that said, I know you better than that. He kept it up until Kakashi added defensively. It was also the beginning of the Uchiha clan being rebuilt. It was a good excuse for a bash. Aruka just shook his head. Man, I would pay money to see how you would act with kids of your own. Not in this lifetime. Kakashi snapped, earning a startled look from his companion. The Hokage and the council couldn't order me to reproduce. He added darkly. You, mister. I will do my duty at any cost. Aruka teased, trying to lighten that suddenly heavy mood of his silver-haired companion. Kakashi stopped suddenly and turned to glare down at the shorter Chunin. I would slit my own throat first. He growled. Then in a puff of smoke he was gone, leaving a very puzzled teacher behind. Now that sentiment you are going to have to explain to me, Scarecrow. He muttered as he continued down the street alone. Tsunade was in a foul mood. Not only had Naruto not shown up for work that morning, something he had never failed to do. Despite what she had told him the day before, she still expected him to be there. But she had yet to find the time to send someone after him to drag him to his desk. Of course, she admitted, somewhat reluctantly and only to herself, that if he was in the same sort of mood that he was in the previous day, then she really didn't want him around anyway. But then first thing in the morning it was brought to her attention that the messenger she had sent to Sand 5 days before had still not returned, and she had to consider the possibility that something had happened to the young man. So after rewriting the letter to Gaara, she summoned a second messenger, but this time gave him an Anbu escort of 3. That order was surprisingly what had started the day off on the wrong foot. Uchiha Sasuke and Hyuga Neji easily accepted the mission, but the third member of the team threw a royal fit which had everyone present shocked. Rock Lee just wasn't the type to refuse an assignment, but the taijutsu specialist did, and loudly when he was told that after seeing to the messengers safely they were to scout the area to see if there was any sign of the newly resurrected Akatsuki and to find out what had become of the first messenger. I can't do that, the green-clad shinobi protested loudly. That could take a week or more. I can't leave Sakura alone with a new baby for that long. Everyone present rolled their eyes at that. Lee, Tsunade slowly got to her feet, bracing her hands on her desk. Your daughter is almost 6 weeks old. Sakura had a fairly easy pregnancy and delivery. She is perfectly capable of handling things by herself, and she has plenty of willing people to help if she needs it. But she is so delicate. What if the strain is too much for her? She needs me. The young man protested again. Sasuke had to cover his mouth to keep from laughing. Even if Sakura had allowed her husband to treat her like a porcelain doll throughout her pregnancy, he knew that his former teammate was far from delicate. He was surprised actually that the pink-haired medic hadn't beaten Lee to within an inch of his life for the amount of hovering he was doing. A glance at Neji told him that the Hyuga was thinking something along the same lines if his lips twitching were any indication. Meanwhile, Lee stubbornly continued to refuse to leave until Tsunade compromised by telling him that the party could split at the sand border, at which point he could continue to escort the runner to the sand village and then back to Konoha. It would be at most a 4-day trip if all went well, while Neji and Sasuke went on reconnaissance without him. The compromise came when he set his jaw stubbornly yet again, and the Godame informed him that he could either leave for 4 days or be locked in the brig for 2 weeks. At which point the Uchiha clapped a hand over his mouth while he and the Hyuga agreed for him and drug him out of the Hokage's office before she could make good on her threat. The two didn't have to be geniuses to realize that Tsunade was in a very bad mood, and neither one wanted to see what would happen if Lee pushed the issue. Once the 4 men were off, the blonde Hokage went back to what she had been doing since the day before: pretend to work while she planned out what she was going to do to a certain silver-haired man if he showed his masked face before she got over her fury at him for his behavior the previous day. His insubordination had reached new levels, and combined with what she perceived as blatant flirtation was getting on her nerves. Not that she minded flirting, quite the opposite in fact, but as far as she knew the man was taken and she had no intention of allowing it to continue. She was not one to knowingly cause problems in a relationship, even if he was the most beautiful male she had ever had the privilege of seeing. Half nod. Tsunade sighed heavily. Why, she wondered, did all the best-looking men have to be gay? She didn't get a chance to continue that train of thought, however, because just then her office door opened and in walked Naruto. Hi Tsunade. Sorry I'm late, he called cheerfully as he headed for his desk. The Hokage blinked in surprise at his seemingly happy demeanor. Glancing at the clock on the wall, she realized with a start that it was nearly 4 o'clock in the afternoon. She hadn't realized it was so late. She was about to ask the young man how he was feeling when Shizune entered with a stack of papers to be signed. The 2 women were halfway through the task when they were distracted by the sound of whistling. They both looked across the room to see Naruto whizzing through the giant pile of files on his desk, a cheerful tune on his lips. Tsunade was still not in the best of moods. What the hell's up with you now? She barked, startling both Naruto and Shizune with her abrupt tone. Yesterday you were trying to pound people into walls. What happened? You get late or something? Shizune gasped at her blunt question while Naruto threw back his head and roared with laughter, which had Tsunade raising a brow at him. Shizune shook her head at both of them but didn't leave the room. She was curious to see what Naruto said once he calmed down enough to breathe, let alone talk. I swear Baba-chan, you are sometimes worse than Jiraiya. He finally chuckled. And no, I didn't. I simply had a good night's sleep. He wasn't about to tell her that he had rested so well because he had been wrapped in Temari's arms. The Hokage's eyes narrowed. I'm serious, boy, what happened? Naruto just shook his head at her. I'm serious as well. I had a good night's rest and a big breakfast. Now if you don't mind, I have to get this paperwork done. I have better things to do this weekend than come into the office. With that, he picked up a file, swiveled his chair so that his back was facing her. Tsunade would have pursued the issue except that Shizune gave her a warning look and shook her head. Just be glad he's back to normal, the younger woman whispered while she put another document needing a signature in front of the Hokage. The blonde woman decided then that her protege did have a point about having better things to do for the weekend. So she chose to wait until the end of the day to question him again. Temari was halfway back to the apartment when she realized that she really didn't feel like sitting around just then. It was a lovely sunny day and being indoors didn't appeal to her, so she decided to go for a longer stroll. She had a lot to think about, especially considering everything that had happened in the last 24 hours. Heading in the general direction of the training grounds, she had to admit to herself that she was probably still a little shell-shocked over everything that had occurred. Like she had said to Naruto earlier that morning, she still wasn't completely sure why she had decided against terminating the pregnancy. It just felt right. She couldn't explain it, even to herself. The fact that she wanted a child of her own, she supposed was probably the biggest factor. The last couple years her biological clock had been driving her crazy, although she had managed to hide it well, burying herself in her work, waiting she had told herself for the man that wasn't intimidated by her and wouldn't wed himself at the first death threat Gaara or Kankuro threw at him. The blonde woman shook her head. She was a 28-year-old virgin, for crying out loud. And in the ninja world that was practically unheard of. Of course technically she was no longer a virgin after what she had been through, but still in the area that mattered she was. She gave a disgusted snort. Hell, she had never even received a decent kiss. The few pecks she had bestowed on Nara Shikamaru as a teenager didn't count as far as she was concerned. They had been definitely one-sided, as she had later discovered that his heart belonged to another. So had ended her first crush. Pausing in her journey, she realized that it had been quite some time since she had thought about the lazy shinobi. After a quick glance around, Temari changed her direction of travel. It didn't take her long to get to her destination, a quiet grove of ancient cedar trees. In this corner of Konoha it was beautiful and peaceful. A giant iron gate loomed ahead of her, signaling her arrival to her destination as she walked along the 10-foot hedge that served as a fence. Temari had not yet stepped through the entrance when she heard a voice break the stillness, a woman's voice. Well, I made it back in one piece. It was hard as hell. For a while I wasn't sure I could do it. Temari had a feeling that she knew who the voice belonged to. Stepping through the gate, she made her way across the well-trimmed glass and past the ornate headstones. This was the Konohagakure Cemetery, and Temari marveled at the difference between it and the one in Suna. It was a far more restive place and didn't give her the creeps at all. Her comparisons were cut short when she rounded a mausoleum and spotted the owner of the voice she had heard only moments before. Standing in amongst the various memorials stood Yamanaka Ino. She made a captivating sight, as if she had been painted into the landscape. Her long blonde ponytail being the only thing that broke the illusion as it swayed gently with the light wind. She was dressed in the skin-tight black outfit of the Anbu, with weapons pouches strapped to both legs. 2 katanas were strapped to her back. Both hilts had purple ribbons braided into the grips and their tails hung as streamers from the ends. Sabaku no Temari. The black-clad figure spoke without even turning her head. Yamanaka Ino, hello. The other blonde didn't bother to reply, so Temari moved to join her. The two women had an interesting relationship that had barely changed since the days when the two had competed for the affection of one Nara Shikamaru. They basically ignored each other's presence. Hello Shika, it has been a long time. Temari spoke quietly to the marble headstone that she now stood before. The plaque mounted in the center gleamed like polished glass, proclaiming his name along with the dates of birth and death. Along the top arch of the marble was carved intricate designs of cloud formations, something Temari remembered hearing that Ino had insisted upon. As the Sankunoichi silently paid her respects, she belatedly realized that the date of death on the stone also signified the last time she had been to Konoha. 5, nearly 6 years, she shook her head silently. How could time go by so quickly without her even noticing? Ino turned her head slightly, giving Temari a questioning look. It's hard to believe that it's been almost 6 years. The Suna Junin explained. Ino nodded sadly in agreement. It feels like yesterday. Temari took a moment to really study her companion. Ino wore more makeup than she remembered. Her light blue eyes were heavily outlined with mascara and liner. Despite the dirt and smidges indicating that she had had a rough mission. But it was the soul-racking grief that lingered in her eyes that really caught the wind summoner's attention. There was no longer the hint of mischief in her demeanor. Temari's gaze fell back to the memorial as she wondered what it would be like to love someone so much that when they died, a part of you died along with them. She knew that her affection for the lazy Shikamaru had been shallow at best, for she had felt very little when he had informed her that he didn't have any interest in her. How long have you been in Konoha? Ino suddenly asked, breaking the silence. 5 days. Temari replied after a moment's thought. Without another word, Ino turned to leave. Bowing quickly in respect, the Sand Nin followed suit. Neither of the women spoke again until they had exited the gate. Are you planning on being here for a while? Ino asked politely. Temari shrugged. Not really sure, it depends on when my brothers come to pick me up. So you're here on vacation then? Ino inquired as she glanced pointedly at her companion's back, which was devoid of the giant fan that usually rode there. Temari suddenly felt self-conscious about her casual dress and obvious lack of her usual gear. When she had dressed in her slightly large pants and black t-shirt and light jacket to go to lunch with Naruto, she hadn't even thought of her lack of usual attire. Not that she would feel comfortable wearing the revealing outfit with fishnet that she usually wore at this point in time. But she did miss her weapons and hit. Ino clearing her throat made her realize that she had neglected to answer the other blonde's question. Not by choice, I ran into some trouble on my last outing and lost all my gear when I was taken prisoner. Luckily Naruto found me after I had been left for dead. Ino turned shocked blue eyes to the Sand Kunoichi. To her, Temari was one of the last people she would have ever seen getting captured in a fight. The wind summoning woman was just too damn good at what she did. And then there was her psycho siblings. Yes, as far as the mind user was concerned, Kankuro was just as bad. Agara. He gave her the creeps with his face paint and chakra strings, not to mention his abnormally green eyes. She found his puppets more appealing than Kankuro himself. Who were you up against? She asked rather than dwelling on the Sand Kunoichi's younger brothers. They appeared to be the new generation of Akatsuki, or at least a group very similar. Came the reply. Ino frowned. Scratched out symbols but gray cloaks with silver and green birds instead of black with flames. Temari gaped at her, nearly tripping over her own feet. Yes, how did you know? That was not what Ino wanted to hear. Fuck, I knew I should have pulled back and stayed after them longer. She growled mostly to herself. Then to a puzzled Temari. I was on the trail of a group dressed like that, but I wasn't able to get close enough to find out who they were. Then they found out I was around and tried to ambush me. A smirk suddenly replaced the scowl on her full lips. But I knew they were coming, so I was able to take out all 6 of them. I tried to keep one alive for questioning, but he did some kind of weird jutsu and literally blew himself up, hence my appearance. She finished with a rueful gesture at her soiled uniform. Temari tamped down on the strange surge of emotion she suddenly felt. You said there were 6. That's 2 more than had me. She wondered wildly if it could possibly be the same men, only with a couple extras. Ino nodded. Can you describe them to me? Were any of them missing an ear? Ino barely had to think over her reply. No, not that I saw. Of course, mister. I'll blow myself up and splatter my remains all over the countryside. Had a hood on so I couldn't tell you about him. Temari felt herself slump slightly. Maybe it was too much to hope for that the men who had violated her were already dead, even if a part of her did want that honor for herself. When did all this happen? This morning, just before dawn. The bastards really knew how to ruin someone's day. There was a while when I wasn't sure that I would get out of there in one piece. They were really good. This morning, that's almost 2 weeks since Naruto found me. It is possible that they could have split up before or after joining other teams. She realized. Could you describe them to me? They might be some of the same ones that I ran into. Ino nodded as she thoughtfully twirled her long bangs around her left index finger. Sure. Who do you want first? The men of the women? Women. There were women. Damn straight. There were 4 of the bitches. The guys had nothing on those chicks. They were beyond vicious. There were only men in the group I encountered. Temari murmured quietly, the disappointment clear in her voice. Well, the only guy the first got a good look at was big, built like a bull and had black hair that was starting to gray with a weird little attempt at a goatee to match. Ino supplied lightly. Not one of them. Temari informed her. The black-clad blonde didn't have to be a mind reader to know that this conversation was more important to her counterpart than she was letting on. Tell you what, if you give me a description of them, I'll keep an eye out when I go back out tomorrow after this group's trail. She offered with a grin. That would definitely be a big help. Temari thanked her, returning the other blonde's smile with one of her own. As soon as I'm back on my feet, I would definitely like to return there. Hospitality. Ino chuckled when she saw the rather wicked gleam that entered her companion's silver eyes. The mind user decided then that she would truly love to see the vengeance promised in the Sand Kunoichi's gaze when she found her captors. Care to join me at the tea house for a snack? Ino suddenly asked out of the blue. Temari shot her a questioning look. I always stop for something sweet after I get home. If you're interested, I wouldn't mind the company. Ino supplied. The wind user hesitated slightly. The 2 of them had never really spent any time together outside of a group gathering. In fact, she was pretty sure they had just had their longest civil conversation to date. I wouldn't want to intrude. I'm sure there is someone closer to you that you would like to spend time with. Ino chuckled. Not really. Sakura joins me sometimes, but I'm not really in the mood to be oohing and awing over her new baby. I just want to relax. New baby. Again, something Temari was unaware of and didn't recall Hinata mentioning. You betcha. A little girl, cute as a button, but I'm not in the mood for cute right now. Ino replied. Temari whistled. Wow. So Sakura finally gave in and married Lee, did she? Ino laughed as well. Well, it definitely wasn't that simple, but yeah, that was the end result. Personally, I think if she had been with anyone else, he would have given up on her years ago. Temari chuckled again. I do recall Sakura putting Lee through the ringer on more than one occasion, but he has been in love with her for as long as I've known him. Ino nodded. He's loyal as hell. A grin split her lips. You should have seen the fuss he was putting up at the Hokage Tower today when I got in. Temari wiggled her eyes in anticipation. Oh, please do tell. She loved gossip. Well, it seems he was sent on his first mission since the baby was born and he was less than willing to go. Lee unwilling to go on a mission. Temari stared at Ino in disbelief. The pony-tailed blonde nodded vigorously. You should have seen it. Neji and Sasuke had to literally drag him out of the Hokage's office. No, Temari exclaimed, her eyes wide. Ino giggled. Yes, he was blustering about how delicate his little Sakura was and how she needed him by her side at every moment. What do you think of that claim? Temari asked as she tried not to burst into laughter. Since she didn't know the details of the pink-haired medic's pregnancy, but she didn't strike her as the clinging type. I think that at the moment Sakura is probably doing cartwheels and enjoying her breathing room. Both women chuckled at the picture Ino's comment conjured up. So what do you say to some tea and sweets? Ino asked again. My treat. Temari nodded. Sure. I would love to hear more of what's been going on in Konoha lately. Naruto isn't the best person for gossip. Ino arched a brow. Naruto. Yeah, I've been bunking with him since I got here. The Sand Kunoichi felt her cheeks heat slightly as her companion's finely shaped brows practically disappeared into her hair. I was pretty messed up when he found me. She struggled to explain. For some reason she didn't want to use the excuse they had been using to date, not with Ino. I feel safe around him. She finished with a sheepish shrug. Ino nodded her understanding but remained silent on the subject. She suspected that there was more to the story but decided against asking any direct questions. The two women lapsed into silence for a few minutes, until they reached the outskirts of the village. So what do you want to know? Ino finally asked. Temari shrugged. Everything. I talked to Hinata a bit the other day but we didn't have that much time to cover everything. She never mentioned Sakura and Lee's baby. What's her name by the way? Ayame. Lucky for her she took after her mother in looks, except her hair is darker. And so the two blondes continued to trade gossip for several hours over tea and a large assortment of pastry. It was later than Naruto planned when he finally abandoned his desk and headed home. Thankfully he wasn't sidetracked by anyone on his way. He was trying to keep himself from running. Although logically he knew that Temari would be in his apartment when he got there, a part of him, the part that was still recovering from the events of the last few days, was terrified that she would be gone by the time he got home. In the end he managed to keep himself to a very fast walk. After what seemed like the longest walk home of his life he arrived at his building, taking the steps 3 at a time. He was quickly at his door. He forced himself to pause and take a deep slow breath as he reminded himself that it was almost 10 o'clock and that his guest might very well be asleep already. As soon as the door opened it was very evident that that was not the case. Every light in the house was on, and although he didn't immediately spot Temari he could hear cupboard doors opening and closing in the kitchen. Shrugging out of his jacket and kicking off his footwear he went to investigate. The golden-haired Kunoichi was busy rummaging through his floor-to-ceiling pantry cupboards when he entered the kitchen area. He was too happy to see her to really care that his kitchen now looked like a war zone. The countertops were laden with pots, bowls and various vegetables. Since she didn't seem to notice his presence he moved to lean against the open pantry door. "Whatcha doing?" he asked. Temari gave a startled shriek and spun to face him. "Whoa, sorry Temari, I didn't mean to scare you," he quickly assured her, even as he took a step back to give her some space. As soon as Temari realized who he was, she slumped back against the shelves behind her, her hand pressed over her pounding heart as she tried to take a deep breath to calm her nerves. She gave Naruto a wobbly smile as she did so. Gee Temari, I'm really sorry. The blonde shinobi felt really terrible. The last thing she needed right now was to be scared out of her wits by someone she trusted. That's okay. I should have been paying attention. I guess my training is already going downhill. She joked, trying to wipe the guilty look off of Naruto's face. Finally satisfied that her heart rate was back to normal, she straightened and absently brushed the non-existent wrinkles from her navy-colored kimono. Well, now we know that my heart works fine. Naruto did relax a little then. If she could joke about it, then he figured that she must be alright. He was about to ask her what she had been looking for, but the words were cut off when the Sand Kunoichi suddenly moved closer and wrapped her arms around his waist. Welcome home, she murmured softly as she hugged him close for a moment. The stunned fox vessel automatically returned her embrace. So how was the office today? Temari asked, moving back just enough that she could look him in the eye, as Naruto's arms blocked her from going any further. She didn't mind, thought. After everything that had happened in the last 12 hours, she found that she liked being in his arms and didn't stop to analyze why. Naruto shrugged lightly. Tsunade was in a bit of a bad mood at first, but it wasn't too bad. He wasn't really interested in talking about his day. He had never once been welcomed home to his apartment in the manner that Temari just had, and he was enjoying the feel of her against him. His hands cupped the small of her back while hers had moved to rest on his arms. Her long golden hair hung down her back in thick waves, having been tied back into a low ponytail. The silky strands caressed the backs on his hands while her scent told him that she must have just showered. So I got all of the important paperwork done, he informed her, trying to think of any conversation they could have that would keep her in his arms a little longer. It just felt right having her there. So I don't need to go back until Monday, providing no emergencies pop up. He continued quietly, unaware that his voice was almost a whisper. So you have the weekend free then? She asked just as softly. Oh, except for babysitting tomorrow night. Temari smiled. And sparring with Yumino Iruka in the morning. She reminded him. Naruto frowned slightly. You're right, and here I thought I would just be able to lay around and do nothing. Temari chuckled at that. I can't imagine you laying around doing nothing for more than an hour, you would get bored. He chuckled at that. She knew him too well, or at least his reputation. He caught himself before he blurted out, not if you're with me. Deciding that that would be a little too forward of him, even if they were currently standing in each other's arms. So what did you do today? He asked, trying to change the subject and focus on something else. I went for a walk and actually ran into Yamanaka Ino. We ended up going for tea and talking for most of the afternoon. Naruto's eyes widened. Ino, as in hair in a ponytail, take over your mind, Ino. I thought you two hated each other. She smiled at his description. Barely tolerated would be more accurate. But we have both grown up a bit and I think we now actually share some common ground. Huh. Go figure. Naruto chuckled. So what were you looking for here? He inquired with a nod towards the open pantry. Temari blushed slightly. Oh, I was trying to find something to make for dinner. She informed him, finally stepping out of his arms so that she could continue her interrupted search. Sorry, I didn't realize it was so late. I was planning to have food ready for when you got here. She apologized. You mean you haven't eaten yet? Naruto asked as he tried not to focus on the feeling of loss when she left their embrace. No, I haven't, but then I had a ridiculous amount of sweets when I was out with Ino, so I didn't start to feel hungry until recently. Naruto nodded his understanding. Before he could suggest a simple sandwich or ramen, Temari pulled out a tall clear container. By the way, what is this? She asked, holding it up for his inspection. Naruto grinned upon seeing the long multicolored noodles. That's called spaghetti, he informed her. Temari gave the jar a thoughtful look. Spaghetti, huh? I've never heard of it. Then that's what we're having. Naruto announced, taking the container and heading for the fridge. But what exactly is it? And why is it different colors? The Sand Kunoichi asked curiously while she watched him rummage through his freezer before pulling out a large paper-wrapped package. It's a kind of pasta. I found it when I was in Earth Country for a mission years ago. It's usually just the plain light color because it's made with sifted flour. But I also like the other 3 flavors that I found. As he talked, he set his load onto the counter and bent down to retrieve a large cast iron frying pan from under his stove. The green is spinach, the red is tomato, and the brown is whole wheat. I always just mix them up. Temari trailed after him, intrigued. So you fry it? She asked skeptically. The shinobi chuckled. No, the noodles are boiled, the pan is to make the sauce to go over top of it. With a few quick rips, he had opened the frozen package and dumped the contents into the frying pan as he set it on the burner and turned on the element. What kind of sauce? She inquired, eyeing what looked like a lump of meat. Well, there are all sorts of ones you can make, but tonight I'll do the simple one. Ground beef in tomato sauce with veggies thrown in. Temari had to admit that it sounded interesting. What happened to me making dinner? She joked. You made breakfast this morning, and I'm starting to feel like a slave driver here. Well, you are my guest. Naruto replied as he bustled around the kitchen. And this doesn't really count since you don't know how to prepare it. Well, at least let me help then. Naruto grinned at her words before suddenly snaking his arm around her waist and half carrying her over to the counter where he seemed to magically produce a large knife. Want to chop veggies? He asked impishly. Temari shook her head at him even as she accepted the blade. You're a goofball, Naruto, she informed him. Sticks and stones. He teased back. For the next half hour, Naruto showed her how to make the sauce from scratch. She had to admit to being a little unsure of the outcome, especially when he started adding spices seemingly at random. But in the end, after handing her a plate loaded with noodles and sauce topped with something he called Parmesan cheese, she found that it was very tasty. And by the end of the meal, she had decided that she had a new favorite food. The pair worked together to wash dishes and clean up the kitchen while Naruto told her about the old shopkeeper he had finally been able to convince to bring the ingredients in all the way from Earth Country for him. By the time they were finished, it was nearly midnight and they were both ready for bed. There was a bit of an awkward moment when Naruto announced that it was time to hit the sack. Temari found herself almost wanting to ask if he would be sleeping with her again. But before she could find the words, Naruto kissed her gently on the cheek before whispering a good night and disappearing out the balcony door. With a sigh, the kunoichi turned in as well. But before crawling into bed, she opened the bedroom door. Thanks for listening. In the next part. In the meantime, please leave a review. I would love to hear your feedback. Especially if it helps me improve the overall story.